Chapter 27:13 Fame spreads across the Fire Dragon Empire. When White Feather heard Cold Shadow's words, she was stunned, her brain seizing up momentarily. How is this possible? White Feather exclaimed almost instinctively. The selection lasted less than 10 minutes. How could nearly 900 Tier 3 great experts slaughter each other so thoroughly within that time? Without a large gap in strength, a fight between Tier 3 experts would take at least 2 to 5 minutes to finish. This rule of thumb was already widely accepted in God's domain. Upon reaching Tier 3, almost every player would have at least a few life-saving skills. They could easily fight a battle of attrition. Hence, there was a popular saying that while Tier 3 experts could be defeated easily, killing them was challenging. No, they didn't fight each other. Cold Shadow shook her head. She then added calmly, according to our insider, over half of the foreign aid teams chose to forfeit. Forfeit? White Feather grew even more confused at this revelation. She felt that the more she delved into this matter, the more incomprehensible it became. Meanwhile, inside the gloomy hall, 1,000 Miles and the upper echelons of the many superpowers present also received news on what happened during the selection battle. They were inevitably bewildered. Have they lost their minds? Over half of them forfeited. 1,000 Miles cursed out loud when he saw his subordinates report. Investigate immediately. Anyone who chose to forfeit shouldn't even think of receiving any of the promised benefits. With the huge numerical advantage they had, they could have annihilated Zero Wings members even if they had to throw bodies at them. Vice Guild Leader Miles. The gray-robed berserker standing before 1,000 Miles shrank back slightly before saying quietly, "The ones that forfeited aren't our guild's foreign aid." "What happened to our foreign aid then?" 1,000 Miles asked in response. "Our foreign aid?" After peeking at 1,000 Miles, the gray-robed berserker answered hesitantly, "Black Flame killed them all. Moreover, he didn't kill just our foreign aid but also the other 3 guilds' foreign aid." "Are you sure Black Flame did it alone? Are they not messing with you?" 1,000 Miles asked in disbelief. "I've verified with them already." The gray-robed berserker nodded. Black Flame indeed killed them by himself. Out of the 400 players that targeted Zero Wing, not a single one survived. Alone? He annihilated all 400 Tier 3 great experts? 1,000 Miles suddenly felt a little dizzy. This information was too much for his brain to process. He even felt that he was hallucinating right now. According to the foreign aid teams, Black Flame already possesses a mana domain. The range and strength of his mana domain are also unprecedented. Tier 3 experts can't exert even 10% of their combat power while inside it. Just moving their bodies is a challenging task, the berserker reported after summoning up his courage. Not only did a player obtain a mana domain, but said mana domain was even so powerful. If someone had told him such a thing before, even he would consider that person crazy. Either that or this person was a newcomer in God's domain and ignorant about mana domains. A mana domain? 1,000 Miles' expression stiffened at this term. How can he have a mana domain? At this time, 1,000 Miles wasn't the only person dumbfounded. The other superpowers' upper echelons were similarly bewildered when they heard this piece of news. After all, it was far more unbelievable than Shi Feng's feat of single-handedly annihilating 4 foreign aid teams. In God's domain, the mana domain was the standard that determined whether an NPC was strong or weak. So long as an NPC had a mana domain, they would be considered a true powerhouse in the whole of God's domain. After Frost Heaven's members received a detailed report of what happened during the selection battle, they too fell silent. Brilliant Blue in particular, wore an extremely wrinkled and ugly look on his face. Previously, no one from Frost Heaven believed what Shi Feng had said. In their opinion, Shi Feng was only talking big. Brilliant Blue had even mocked Shi Feng for his arrogance. However, insiders were now telling them that everything was true. Moreover, the situation was far more terrifying than how Shi Feng described it. "Old Hong, did you and Muxin know about this since the beginning?" 7 Wonders couldn't help asking Hong Xinyuan. "We knew a little." Chuckling, Hong Xinyuan added, "However, for confidentiality's sake, we didn't tell anyone." Muxin also nodded in agreement. Only, even she was surprised by such an excellent battle record. She never expected that Shi Feng's mana domain would be so powerful when released. It was at least 10 times stronger than what she experienced. "You two really know how to keep us in the dark." When Seven Wonders looked at Hong Xinyuan's indifferent expression and recalled the situation with Shi Feng before, he smiled bitterly. In that case, I'll leave Zero Wings matters to you in the future. After glancing at the silent, brilliant blue, Hong Xinyun faintly smiled and said, Guild leader, please rest assured. After the end of the selection battle, news about Zero Wings spread like the plague. This was especially true for the details regarding Black Flame. Many of the major powers that had come to spectate the competition were shocked. Not only had Black Flame single-handedly dominated the preliminary selection, but he even possessed the rumored mana domain. This battle record instantly made Black Flame the focus of discussion for many players all over the Fire Dragon Empire. Quite a number of the Empire's players even sought to join the pseudo-superpower known as Zero Wing. War God's Temple Mythology's Lounge. Vice Guild Leader, the situation has become somewhat troublesome now. Not only does that Black Flame possess a mana domain, but his fame has also spread throughout the Fire Dragon Empire. I'm afraid it'll become very difficult to realize our acquisition plan now, White Feather said anxiously when she saw that Black Flame's name was being mentioned everywhere in the Fire Dragon Empire's forums. This situation might even affect Miracle's ranking. Mythology had chosen to partner with Miracle for the competition this time. In terms of guild foundations and strength, Miracle was above Frost Heaven. However, not only did Miracle lose all its foreign aid, but Frost Heaven even had Zero Wing supporting it. The gap in strength between the two guilds had instantly narrowed by a large margin. Black Flame has indeed become a big variable now. Glancing at the battle report she received, Cold Shadow smiled and added, however, at the end of the day, the struggle for the reserve seats isn't something that can be decided by one person. Not to mention, even with a mana domain, Black Flame won't be able to survive for long in this competition. That great personage has already said he would personally take action against Black Flame. That great personage is going to make a move? This news surprised White Feather. Black Flame still thinks he is invincible just because he has a mana domain. He doesn't know that there is always someone stronger. Even a mana domain cannot save him now, Cold Shadow sneered as she read the detailed report on Shi Feng. While a mana domain was indeed powerful, it was a negligible existence in front of absolute strength. While the various superpowers were patiently waiting for the official competition to begin, Shi Feng secretly paid a visit to a bar called Moonfire in Flame Dragon City's outskirts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this time, only one woman was sitting quietly at the bar counter. This woman wore delicate light blue robes, and just the view of her back could mesmerize countless people. However, this woman's aura was as hot as flames, deterring people from summoning up the courage to approach her. You're here. When the woman saw Shi Feng enter the bar, she greeted him as though welcoming an old friend she hadn't seen for a long time. Meanwhile, this woman was none other than the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Phoenix Pavilion Master. Demon Queen Phoenix Rain. Chapter 27:14. Meeting Phoenix Rain again. Accepting Phoenix Rain's invitation, Shi Feng walked over and sat beside her. In the time I haven't seen you, you've become a lot stronger again, Phoenix Rain praised as she scanned Shi Feng. Not too much. Going straight into the topic, Shi Feng asked, is everything all right on your side? He had suddenly visited the Moonfire Bar because of a message from Phoenix Rain. Initially, he had been a little happy to receive the message. Since he had thought that Phoenix Rain would never appear before him again, he felt that the situation shouldn't be as terrible as Duan Hanshan made it out to be. However, the moment he laid eyes on Phoenix Rain, he instantly understood. The situation was much worse than he thought. This was because the Phoenix Rain he saw couldn't be considered human. All her information was labeled as unknown and couldn't be examined at all. Moreover, the feeling he got from her was as if she had wholly integrated her existence with the flowers and trees of God's domain. Shi Feng even got the impression that Phoenix Rain was native to God's domain. Meanwhile, at Shi Feng's question, a hint of surprise flashed in Phoenix Rain's eyes. She then smiled faintly and replied, you can say that it's all right yet not all right at the same time. It seems the situation still isn't too terrible. Shi Feng nodded. He then asked another question, can you tell me what exactly happened then? The disappearance of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 3 pavilion masters had shaken the various superpowers of God's domain. If not for the pavilion having hidden this matter well, it would have long since made headlines in the real world. This I cannot say. Phoenix Rain shook her head. I went to great lengths to come here to tell you only two things. Although Phoenix Rain's voice was calm, her eyes betrayed deep exhaustion. What is it? Shi Feng didn't probe too much into her situation. He could feel that Phoenix Rain wasn't joking with him. In that case, there wouldn't be any meaning for him to continue probing. The first is that I hope you can take care of my little sister, Phoenix Rain said, then took out an information card and handed it to Shi Feng. Her information and address are recorded here. I am no longer by her side. Although she has great abilities, the people who are troubling her are difficult. If you have the chance, I hope you can help resolve her problems. After glancing at the information card, Shi Feng was stunned. Phoenix Rain's little sister was residing in the upper zone. Aren't you in the upper zone too? Shi Feng asked in confusion. I'm in the upper zone? Phoenix Rain was surprised by this piece of news. Afterward, as if reacting to something, she chuckled and said, That's right. I guess you can say that. However, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to meet her right now. I can only hope you will help her. I can't trust anyone else for this. This shouldn't be a problem. I'll go take a look if I visit the upper zone in the future. Shi Feng nodded in agreement. Phoenix Rain had helped both him and Zero Wing a lot thus far. He didn't mind taking care of her little sister now. Thank you. Phoenix Rain breathed out a sigh of relief when she heard Shi Feng's answer. She then inhaled deeply before saying solemnly, Next, the second matter will be my two pieces of advice to you. Advice. Seeing Phoenix Rain's serious expression, Shi Feng couldn't help asking, Is it Saint's hand? Based on the information from Duan Han's Han, the disappearance of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's leadership had something to do with Saint's hand. Moreover, the various superpowers also appeared to be fearful of the guild. No. Shaking her head, Phoenix Rain said, My first advice is for you to be wary of 3 people. 3 people? Shi Feng was somewhat confused. He could understand if Phoenix Rain wanted him to be wary of some powerful organization, yet she told him to be wary of 3 individuals. If not for Phoenix Rain's solemn expression and her lofty status, he would have most likely treated her words as a joke. Yes, 3 people. Slowly, Phoenix Rain said, I don't know these 3 people's names. They use various aliases, but not one of them is their real name. The only thing I can tell you is their characteristics. These 3 people are a madman, a girl, and a young, scholarly person. If you meet them, run as far as you can. Never approach them or the consequences will be harsh. You must remember this point. That's all the information on these 3 people? Shi Feng memorized Phoenix Rain's words, but the information he had to work with was scanty and vague. I only know this much. Phoenix Rain shook her head and chuckled. She then continued, The next piece of advice is simpler, and that is to stock up on as many 7 luminaries crystals as possible. This thing is incredibly valuable, and the more you have, the better. That's a realistic piece of advice. Shi Feng was startled to receive this advice. 7 luminaries crystal was incredibly important during his previous life. Knowing this, he had tasked many guild members with finding and collecting the crystal. However, due to its rarity, the amount they managed to collect wasn't significant. After Shi Feng finished speaking, Phoenix Rain suddenly stood up and tossed 3 gold coins onto the table. She then looked at Shi Feng and said earnestly, I've said everything that can be said. How far you can progress will be up to you. You're leaving already? Shi Feng was again startled when he saw Phoenix Rain preparing to leave. Their conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. He hadn't even gotten to the other questions he wanted to ask. However, Phoenix Rain looked to be short on time. Oh yes. Suddenly, Phoenix Rain pulled out a black crystal from her pocket and tossed it to Shi Feng. I have you to thank for being able to make this visit. I can't use this thing at present, so I'll give it to you. What is this thing? When Shi Feng looked at the unidentifiable black crystal, he felt a sudden urge to eat the crystal whole. Upon noticing the hunger in Shi Feng's eyes, Phoenix Rain chuckled. You better not eat it. It's not edible. Shi Feng felt slightly embarrassed by this situation. He never thought that the black crystal would be powerful enough to affect his mind. Don't worry. I won't eat it, Shi Feng promised. Before I go, I'll tell you one more thing. Tier 4 is just the beginning. Your time. However, before Phoenix Rain could finish speaking, she suddenly disappeared. It was as if she never existed in this place. Now only Shi Feng remained inside the spacious bar. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU forced teleportation? Surprise colored Shi Feng's eyes as he looked at the space where Phoenix Rain had been. However, he quickly denied his conjecture. Oh. There were no spatial fluctuations. It shouldn't be a forced teleport. Yet if she logged off, it should have taken a while before she disappeared. Despite pondering for some time, Shi Feng failed to figure out the mechanism behind Phoenix Rain's sudden disappearance. In the end, he had to give up and shifted his attention to the black crystal in his hand. At least he now knew that Phoenix Rain was safe. I got nothing from using an ordinary identification skill just now. Seems I can only try with omniscient eyes. Taking a deep breath, Shi Feng gathered the surrounding mana around his eyes and stared intently at the black crystal. Omniscient eyes. Chapter 27:15, Eternal Item. As Shi Feng frantically gathered mana inside the bar, the mana around him started liquefying. The standard of his mana was undoubtedly at tier 4. A moment later, twofold magic arrays appeared in his eyes. If a player were to meet his gaze right now, they would most likely shudder instinctively. At this moment, Shi Feng's eyes seemed to be capable of penetrating all truths in the world. No secrets could exist before this pair of eyes. Sure enough, Omniscient Eyes' effects have improved significantly now that my mana has reached the tier 4 standard. Shi Feng was delighted as he looked at the black crystal in his hand. Previously, even when he used the advanced identification skill, he couldn't appraise the black crystal at all. However, with Omniscient Eyes, a loading bar had appeared. It was as if the black crystal's outermost firewall had cracked, and the skill was fervently exploiting this breach and trying to dig into the crystal's core. 10 seconds. 40 seconds. As the forces of the black crystal and Omniscient Eyes continued clashing, Shi Feng frowned. Although Omniscient Eyes has the strength to contend against the black crystal, it apparently still isn't enough. Omniscient Eyes might be digging at the black crystal's firewalls, but the skill had a limited duration of only 1 minute. If it failed to break through the black crystal's defenses during this time, he would have to try again 10 minutes later. Only the result would most likely be the same. Upon seeing Omniscient Eyes and the black crystal at a stalemate, Shi Feng started racking his brain on how he could break through the black crystal's power. The biggest difference between tier 3 and tier 4 is in mana. Since Omniscient Eyes has the strength to go up against the black crystal after being injected with tier 4 mana, the difference between the two is mana. As of now, Omniscient Eyes still has plentiful mana. In other words, the amount of mana isn't crucial for breaking through the black crystal's defenses. If the amount isn't the problem, then the only other possibility is the mana's strength. However, after coming to this conclusion, Shi Feng did not smile in joy. On the contrary, he fell into even greater despair. After all, increasing the strength of mana was easier said than done. On the market, almost all items that improved their users' mana only increased the volume of mana their users held. Generally, if players wished to increase their mana's quality, they would have to either improve their control over mana or raise their tier. In other words, if Shi Feng wanted to increase his mana's strength right now, his only option was to raise his control over mana to a higher realm. No, that's not the only option. Shi Feng shook his head. An increase in the mana's strength also represents an increase in the skill's power. Increasing the skill's power would be equivalent to improving the mana's strength. After Shi Feng thought up to this point, a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. However, less than 5 seconds remained to Omniscient Eyes' duration. I have no choice but to try. Taking a deep breath, Shi Feng unsheathed the abyssal blade and promptly assumed the posture of using the mana technique Light Shadow. The mana swarming around Shi Feng instantly began condensing even further, taking on the shape of a great sword. However, unlike when he used this mana technique at tier 3, the phantom greatsword now looked much more tangible. Meanwhile, after executing Light Shadow, Shi Feng could sense a change occurring in the magic arrays in his eyes. They showed faint signs of evolving into threefold magic arrays. Good. It's effective. Shi Feng couldn't help growing excited. However, the third layer's formation abruptly stopped. The mana still isn't strong enough? Shi Feng frowned. If I want to increase it even further, I'll have no choice but to use Holy Devour. Holy Devour was a move he dreaded to use. Executing the complete Holy Devour was too taxing. It shouldn't be used frequently, even by tier 4 classes. With the reserve seats competition about to begin, he had to keep himself in his peak state. Although executing Holy Devour once wouldn't overwork his brain, it would still exhaust his concentration. However, after thinking for a second, Shi Feng gritted his teeth and threw caution to the wind. To hell with it. Although Phoenix Rain currently wasn't in a life-threatening situation, that was true only for now. There were far too many unknowns and secrets surrounding her. Saint's Hand's side was also filled with mysteries. There was no guarantee that he wouldn't meet a similar fate to Phoenix Rain in the future. Hence he needed to identify the black crystal. Only by doing so would he have a chance at finding some useful information. Immediately, Shi Feng changed his stance once more, and the aura he exuded skyrocketed in intensity. Holy Devour. Boom. Suddenly, ethereal flames enveloped the bar. The flames were so realistic that they triggered the magic arrays set up inside the bar. Some of these magic arrays even started cracking, evidently unable to withstand the powerful mana Shi Feng condensed. Meanwhile, as if violently stimulated, the twofold magic arrays in Shi Feng's eyes completed their transformation into threefold magic arrays. Using Holy Devour directly elevated Omniscient Eyes' strength to a whole new level. Crack. Shi Feng suddenly heard a crack coming from the black crystal. However, half a second later, dizziness assaulted his brain. The horrific mana condensed by Holy Devour also instantly dissipated, leaving behind a tattered bar. Several seconds later, his mind started to clear up. He immediately shifted his gaze to the black crystal in his hand. Did it succeed? Shi Feng inspected the black crystal anxiously. This time, the crystal didn't put up any resistance when he tried to read its information. Row after row of text appeared before his eyes. Upon seeing this information, Shi Feng was stunned. An eternal item? This is actually an eternal item? Shi Feng couldn't help doubting his eyes as he read the information before him. World Stone. Eternal item. Effect 1. Stabilizes the principle of all things. Effect 2. Unknown. Effect 3. Indestructible object. In God's domain, so long as an item was related to eternity, it was an item of gods. Eternal items were legends among legends. According to rumor, even gods had difficulty obtaining one, and some gods would even fight frantically for one. There were various rumors as to the cause of the Great Ancient War, one of which attributed the war to a struggle for eternal items between ancient gods. It seems I still can't do anything about this situation. Shi Feng smiled bitterly as he looked at the World Stone. He had fought for 10 years in God's domain in his previous life. However, he was well aware that he was still ignorant of plenty of secrets regarding God's domain. God's domain wasn't just a game like the general masses thought it to be. Otherwise, the various international corporations wouldn't go so crazy over it. This eternal item told him that the problem Phoenix Rain faced was extraordinary. It wasn't something a Tier 4 sword emperor like himself could look into. After all, even the god-ranked experts in his previous life had great difficulty obtaining such an item. He would most likely have to wait until he reached Tier 5 or even Tier 6 before he could find out more about the situation. Otherwise, he would share the fate of all those missing experts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. While Shi Feng was having goosebumps from thinking about the problem Phoenix Rain was involved in, Yulan suddenly contacted him. "Where are you now, guild leader?" Yulan asked anxiously. "The various superpowers members have already started to gather. Hey, I'll head over now." Shi Feng smiled and nodded. He decided to shelve Phoenix Rain's matter temporarily. Now the only thing he needed to do was improve both his and his guild's strength as much as possible. Only by doing so would he have a better chance of handling the various crises plaguing him. After ending the call, Shi Feng stored the World Stone and dropped a bag of gold coins on the table. He then left the Moonfire Bar. Chapter 27:16 God's Domain's Apex Battle Flame Dragon City, War God's Temple. Despite being the size of 3 sports stadiums, the plaza outside the War God's Temple was currently crowded with players. Aside from the various participating superpowers members, a large portion of these players was here as spectators. Everyone quietly waited for the official start of the competition. Quick look. They're about to announce the battlefield. Suddenly, a huge holographic projection appeared in the sky above the War God's Temple. The projection was hundreds of meters wide, and the image displayed was visible even from several miles away. Meanwhile, with the emergence of this holographic projection, excitement surged in both the players and NPCs in Flame Dragon City. It's finally starting. This competition will determine the future direction of the entire God's domain. Many of the various superpowers' hidden experts will reveal themselves. Once you guys enter the arena, make sure to record these experts' data. They're going to become the giants of God's domain in the future. We must make sure we don't accidentally offend any of them. Newbies, listen up. The guild spent a fortune to reserve a VIP viewing room to let you experience this competition as close as possible. Cherish this opportunity and learn as much as you can from those top talents. The various major powers here to spectate the competition spent time instructing their guild talents and newcomers to cherish this viewing opportunity. After all, this was going to be the apex battle of God's domain. Talents? I want to see just how powerful they are. I heard many of the people on the God's domain's experts list would appear. I wonder if we'll get a chance to see a showdown between these experts? The various major powers' talents and newcomers grew excited upon hearing their superiors' words. They all wished they could take part in the competition themselves. The players in Flame Dragon City weren't the only ones paying attention to this competition. Players all over God's domain were also interested. Unfortunately, the people who could directly spectate the battle numbered very few, which had many players gnashing their teeth in frustration. There were only 100 VIP viewing rooms, each capable of accommodating only 100 players. There were also only 10 million normal viewing seats available. Compared to God's domain's player population, this number was insignificant. However, this still wasn't the most frustrating part. Instead, what frustrated players the most was that aside from players, even NPCs could purchase these viewing tickets. According to the War Gods Temple statistics, 20% of the tickets were bought by NPCs, 60% by guilds, and only 20% by independent players. Time passed quickly. Before anyone knew it, the holographic projection above the War Gods Temple revealed the battlefield for the upcoming competition. Displayed on the projection was an ocean with turbulent waves and dark thunderclouds. At a glance, it was evident this wasn't a place players could enter casually. Strewn across this ocean were 18 islands of varying sizes. The small islands were roughly the size of small leveling maps, while the large islands were around 3 times the size of the small islands. A considerable distance separated these islands. With calm seas, a bronze speedboat would take at least 2 hours to travel from one island to another. The appearance of waves and storms could double this travel time. What? It's going to be a naval battle? No, there are quite a few islands on the ocean. Is it an island occupation battle? The players outside the War Gods Temple were surprised by the unveiled battlefield, and heated discussions promptly broke out. However, before anyone could reach a conclusion, the specific rules for the reserve seat competition were listed one after another. When the players in the plaza saw these rules, they gasped in shock. After all, this competition depended heavily on guild foundations and leadership. The use of individual strength would be greatly restricted in this competition. Moreover, if a guild didn't handle its distribution of teams properly, it might suffer complete annihilation. The rules favor guilds with greater numbers. Mu Lingsha frowned as she gazed at the rules displayed above the War Gods Temple. The minimum requirement for players in this competition was Tier 3. Even if most of the participating superpowers had roughly the same number of guild members, there was a huge difference in the number of Tier 3 players. Take Unyielding Soul for example. The guild had only 4,500 or so Tier 3 players. However, the Super Guild Skydragon family had over 8,000. Of course, the guilds participating in this competition had 6,000 Tier 3 players on average, so the difference between the participating guilds wasn't as significant. Even so, this situation would still create a huge gap between the participating guilds. To begin with, each of the 5 great super guilds had over 20,000 Tier 3 players. This wasn't a number any of the other superpowers could hope to compete with. This was also why none of the other superpowers held any hopes of competing for the 5 other reserve seats. With the revelation of these rules, the gap between the 5 great super guilds and the other participating superpowers became even more significant. For example, the 5 great super guilds could form 21,000-man teams each, whereas the other superpowers couldn't even form 10. And given the random assignment to the various islands, the number of islands the 5 great super guilds could occupy right off the bat would already be several times higher than what the other superpowers could hold. To make matters worse, If a guild couldn't even rank within the top 5 of an island's point ranking, it couldn't leave for other islands to seek greener pastures. These rules are excellent. Miracle's victory is basically sealed now, Cold Shadow said, smiling as she read the competition rules. At this time, Miracle's upper echelon was also ecstatic. After all, Miracle had over 13,000 members participating in the competition this time. As to why the guild could have so many Tier 3 experts, it was thanks entirely to the special tools mythology provided. These tools allowed Tier 2 experts that had trouble with their promotion to overcome the final hurdle. Although these artificially produced Tier 3 experts were lacking in combat standards compared to other Tier 3 experts, they were still bona fide Tier 3 players and much stronger than Tier 2 players. With the addition of these artificial Tier 3 experts, Miracle had the 6th largest player count in this competition. In contrast to Miracle's upper echelon, 7 Wonders and the rest of Frost Heaven's upper echelon currently looked pale. Frost Heaven had only a little over 7,500 members participating. The guild was just barely ranked within the top 10. If not for the competition venue and rules, Frost Heaven could have easily fought for the 6th seat. Now, however, it was evident this wouldn't be possible. Our only choice is to take the risk and form more teams. Otherwise, we won't have a chance of securing a seat, 7 Wonders stated calmly to the elders and grand elders present. That's the only thing we can do. Otherwise, we won't stand a chance against the guilds with greater numbers, Hong Xinyuan said, nodding in agreement. The grand elders and elders present similarly agreed with 7 Wonders' opinion. Since that's the case, I'll start assigning the teams. Although we have to split our numbers into as many teams as possible, we also need to consider the balance of combat power and the struggle for resource nodes. The 5 Grand Elders and 12 Elders present will each lead a team of 300. Your goal is to secure a basic resource node. If your combat power is lacking, you can merge with another team to secure a resource node. Me, Old Hong and Brilliant Blue will each lead a team of 500 in the 10 Swords. We'll do our best to secure an intermediate node each, or a basic node at the very minimum. The 3 Vice Guild leaders will lead the remaining members together with Zero Wing to secure an advanced node or an intermediate node at minimum. 7 Wonders' distribution was considerably conservative, ensuring the least number of problems for the guild. Firstly, it ensured that the guild had enough teams to provide sufficient coverage across the 18 islands. Secondly, every team would more or less have the strength for self-conservation, even if it came across a hostile 1,000-man team. Of course, the chances of actually coming across a 1,000-man team were relatively low. Since each guild only had so many players participating in the competition, using these limited players to form 1,000-man teams was a huge extravagance. To spread their influence as wide as possible, the various participating guilds would naturally form as many teams as possible without compromising their overall combat power. What do you think? 7 Wonders asked as he looked at the guild upper echelon present. In response, the guild elders exchanged looks with each other. However, none of them voiced any objections. 7 Wonders nodded. In that case. Just as he was about to finalize his decision, however, a low voice entered everyone's ears. I object. Immediately, Frost Heaven's upper echelon turned to look at this voice's origin. The owner of this voice was none other than Shi Feng, who had just arrived. However, instead of getting upset at Shi Feng's interjection, 7 Wonders instead asked sincerely, Guild Leader Black Flame, do you have any better suggestions? Following 7 Wonders' question, the Grand Elders and Elders present also turned to Shi Feng. Their actions showed that they were of the same mind as 7 Wonders, and they all looked forward to hearing Shi Feng's suggestion. What happened to these people while I was gone? Shi Feng was a little surprised at 7 Wonders and the others' response. Before he left, these people couldn't even be bothered to look at him. Now, not only did 7 Wonders' attitude change for the better, but even Frost Heaven's Grand Elders and Elders had become more amiable. What Shi Feng didn't know was that news of his frightening battle had already spread. With such terrifying combat power, let alone Frost Heaven, even super guilds would treat him respectfully. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, Shi Feng didn't dwell on the matter. I can't say it is a good suggestion. Calmly, Shi Feng added, I just think that we should change the grouping slightly. How do we change it? 7 Wonders asked curiously. Shi Feng then stretched out an open palm. 5. My suggestion is for Zero Wing to lead 5 separate 100-man teams, while your vice guild leaders lead the remaining 500 players. This way we can maximize our combat effectiveness. Chapter 27:17 Gambit? 5 separate teams? Frost Heaven's elders gasped involuntarily when they heard Shi Feng's suggestion. They were at a disadvantage in numbers, and even the slightest mistake could put paid to securing the 6th reserve seat. Meanwhile, although Seven Wonders' distribution was conservative, it would allow Frost Heaven to avoid significant problems. However, Shi Feng was now suggesting that they split their numbers into 5 additional teams that met the bare minimum requirement of 100 players. This surpassed aggressive action and bordered on madness. Guild leader Black Flame, isn't this a little too aggressive a maneuver? Mushin couldn't help but worry. At this point, everyone already knew that Shi Feng possessed frightening strength. Even if he led the smallest size team, he should still be able to handle most of the problems he encountered. However, the 4 other teams wouldn't have such an assurance. After all, no one else possessed the frightening combat power of Shi Feng. Among Zero Wing's team, the second strongest person was Violet Cloud. And her control over mana was far from comparable to Shi Feng's. This was something Mushin had verified through Violet Cloud's duel with Tianqing. As for Zero Wing's other members, their average combat standards didn't even reach the Void Realm. While they could still become useful combat power, they couldn't change the tide of battle by themselves. In fact, even Domain Realm experts couldn't do so. This was also why Seven Wonders had decided to have Frost Heaven's Grand Elders and Elders lead 300-man teams at a minimum. At this moment, Mushin wasn't the only person puzzled by Shi Feng's suggestion. Even Yulan and Yan Tianqing couldn't help staring at Shi Feng in confusion. Zero Wing had indeed made great progress recently. The guild's top combatants had even experienced continuous improvements. However, they had yet to reach the standard of peerless experts. Aside from Shi Feng, the only other person who could safely lead a team of 100 players in this situation was Violet Cloud. If they split their forces across 5 teams of 100, a single mistake could lead to a team wipe. After all, this competition wasn't some children's game, nor was it a struggle for just a small part of God's domain. It was a competition for the 12 great guilds' reserve seats. None of the various superpowers would hold back this time. In fact, in this competition, even Void Realm experts would only be foot soldiers. Every participating team would most likely have several or even more than a dozen of such experts assigned to them. And while Domain Realm experts could be considered high-end combatants, even they would have to flee if they went up against 100-man teams without sufficient support. In this competition, only peerless experts could possibly single-handedly turn the tide of a battle. Not to mention 100-man teams were only the bare minimum in this competition. If Apex experts came across a 500-man team by themselves, even they would most likely suffer. And if they came across 1,000-man teams, only death awaited them. It is indeed a little aggressive. However, this is also our only chance to secure a seat. Shi Feng did not refute Mushin's words. After all, what she said was true. Otherwise, Frost Heaven won't have a single chance at victory. I'm sure you understand this as well. In the past, due to an inadequate foundation, Frost Heaven failed to secure a reserve seat during the first competition. Meanwhile, the start of the island battle was incredibly important. If they couldn't spread their forces across as many islands as possible, they would basically have to write off the competition. There were only 6 reserve seats up for grabs. Ignoring island sizes, they needed to occupy at least 3 islands worth of resource nodes to have a considerable chance of winning. However, fully occupying 3 islands was easier said than done. When Shi Feng finished speaking, Frost Heaven's upper echelon fell silent. After some time had passed, Hong Xinyun suddenly stepped forward and said, "I also agree with guild leader Black Flame's point of view. We are basically gambling on luck if we only have 21 teams. We might as well put up a fight in that case. However, if luck doesn't favor us and one of our 100-man teams gets isolated, the team won't be able to do much either," Brilliant Blue said, shaking his head. A total of 30 guilds were participating in the competition. On average, there would be at least 2 guilds on every island. If one of their 100-man teams had bad luck and got isolated on an island, the team definitely wouldn't have a good outcome. At Brilliant Blue's words, Frost Heaven's members fell silent once more. After giving the matter some thought, Seven Wonders looked at Shi Feng and said, How about this? I'll agree to form 5 more 100-man teams. However, we will support these 5 teams with only ordinary Tier 3 experts. I'm afraid we cannot afford to assign any peak experts to you. Guild leader. Hong Xinyuan couldn't help but frown at Seven Wonders' words. Although Seven Wonders had agreed to form 5 additional teams, if no peak experts supported these teams, Zero Wings members would basically be walking a tightrope. It wouldn't even be far-fetched to say that Seven Wonders was treating these 5 teams as sacrificial pieces. Of course, Hong Xinyuan could understand Seven Wonders' decision. These 5 teams were a last-ditch effort. They naturally couldn't invest too much combat power in these teams. However, in his opinion, since they were gambling anyway, they might as well add chips to the bet. Old Hong, don't try to persuade me. I've made my decision, Seven Wonders said firmly. I understand. Hong Xinyuan had no choice but to hold his tongue at these words. As Frost Heaven's guild leader, Seven Wonders was the guild's authority. Since Seven Wonders had already decided, Hong Xinyuan would have no way of changing the decision. Guild leader, Zero Wings members aren't familiar with Frost Heaven's members. How about I join them? This way, guild leader Black Flame can command the teams better, Mushin suggested to Seven Wonders. Hey, you'll be the liaison with Zero Wing. Seven Wonders nodded in agreement. Just like Mushin had said, Shi Feng knew nothing about Frost Heaven's members. Without proper understanding, he wouldn't be able to make the best decisions. Meanwhile, as one of Frost Heaven's vice guild leaders, Mushin's understanding of the guild's members was excellent. She was indeed the best candidate for the liaison. Big sis, are you crazy? Krue, who stood beside Mushin, stared at her incredulously. You dare participate in such a gambit? Dying in this competition meant losing 2 levels. For players of their level, losing 2 levels was no laughing matter. After all, they were only one small step away from the crucial level 120 threshold. If they died in this competition, it would severely delay challenging their Tier 4 promotion. Don't worry, my dear little sister. I will follow Guild Leader Black Flame's team. I believe there shouldn't be any problems in that case, Mushin said, chuckling. Beak 2/Beak B11/Beak Kure was momentarily rendered speechless by Mushin's words. Afterward, Frost Heaven's members split up into different teams according to Seven Wonders' arrangement. Simultaneously, 483 Frost Heaven members were assigned to Shi Feng. As for how Shi Feng would distribute these players, Seven Wonders stayed out of it. Guild Leader Black Flame, everyone has arrived, Mushin stated after counting the Frost Heaven members on their side. She then asked curiously, how do you plan on distributing them? I've thought about it already. Chuckling, Shi Feng said, I'll lead a team by myself. Afterward, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud and Fire Dance will each lead a team. The rest of Zero Wings members will follow Violet Cloud's and Fire Dance's teams. Isn't this? Mushin was momentarily dumbfounded. She had anticipated Violet Cloud leading a team by herself, while the rest of Zero Wings members would be split across the 3 remaining teams. After all, Violet Cloud also possessed a mana domain of her own. Yet Shi Feng was having Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose lead teams by themselves instead? At this moment, let alone Mushin, even Yulon, Yen Tianxing, Eluofei, Alluring Summer, Zhao Yueru, Kola, Shadow Sword, Silent Blade, Turtledove, Yi Wumian, Flying Shadow and Rampant Blade were stunned. Of the Zero Wing members present, the ones who needed support the most were the 2 vice guild leaders. After all, the 2 of them hadn't improved their levels and equipment in the slightest over the past few weeks. Although Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's weapons and equipment were still far superior to those of the various superpowers peak experts, the 2 of them were still slightly inferior to Violet Cloud and Fire Dance in combat standard. Not giving them any support was akin to going all in on a gamble. Ignoring everyone's doubts, Shi Feng turned to the 2 people in question and asked, Snow, Aqua, are you fine with this arrangement? No problem. The 2 responded indifferently as if this matter had nothing to do with them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You good? That settles it, then. Shi Feng did not make any additional explanations. Following this, the various superpowers waited for another hour or so until a loud bell tolled in the War God's Temple, the sound echoing throughout Flame Dragon City. The competition for the 12 Great Guilds reserve seats officially began. Immediately, the participants thronging the war god's temple's plaza turned into streaks of light and vanished one after another. Chapter 27:18 Team Distribution. It's starting. It's finally starting. Crap. So this is the spectator stand? Awesome. When the spectating players arrived in their seats, they couldn't help marveling at their surroundings. At this time, everyone was in the sky. More precisely, the spectators were seated in a coliseum-like structure that hovered above the 18 islands serving as the competition venue. The 18 islands were like chessboards, with the participants being the chess pieces. Not only could the spectators freely choose which island to spectate, but they could also zoom in to observe specific battles. The only unfortunate part was that the zoom distance was limited. The closest those in the normal seats could get was 30 meters above the islands. Too far for detailed observations. Spectators in the VIP viewing rooms, however, could not only spectate the battles as if they were there in person but also have the VIP rooms notify them of any ongoing battles. This function allowed the room occupants to avoid missing out on any exciting battles. As the spectators above the competition venue were screaming and exclaiming, the players randomly teleported onto the 18 islands were already taking action. Whether our guild can reach the top to become a giant in God's domain will depend on this battle. The guild will put anyone who performs well in this competition under priority training. Everyone listen up. Our 1,000-man team has only 2 goals. The first is to occupy an intermediate resource node or better as soon as possible. The second is to secure the node firmly. We are fortunate. Our guild has 5 300-man teams on this island. The higher-ups have already stated that we must rank within the top 5 on this island. So long as we achieve this goal, everyone will receive 2,000 GCPs after the competition. The various participating guilds frantically went on the offensive, the tense atmosphere building excitement among the spectators in the sky. Meanwhile, inside a VIP viewing room, as expected of the 5 great super guilds, the depth of their foundations far surpasses the other guilds. Mu Lingsha sighed ruefully as she looked at the statistics of the 18 islands. The 5 great super guilds had between 53 to 61 teams each, and every one of them had at least 6 100-man teams. All of these small teams were led by legends in the virtual gaming industry. Each of the 5 great super guilds had teams on 11 to 13 of the 18 islands. In comparison, the other guilds had teams on only 5 or 6 islands on average, half of what the 5 great super guilds had. Right off the bat, it was already clear that the other guilds stood no chance against the 5 great super guilds. Of course, there were also some lucky guilds that had teams on 8 or 9 islands. However, this couldn't be considered a fortunate matter either, as their numbers were spread so thinly that they could hardly preserve themselves, let alone occupy resource nodes. On the other hand, the 5 great super guilds' personnel were divided relatively evenly. Each of them only had 1 or 2 islands with insufficient personnel, which wouldn't affect the overall situation, as more than half of the islands they occupied had a considerable number of personnel. They wouldn't have any problems ranking within the top 5 in guild points. To put it simply, it was certain that the 5 great super guilds would secure a reserve seat for themselves. In terms of personnel distribution, Miracle and Sacred Temple have the best chance to secure the 6th seat. Both guilds have teams on 9 islands, and their personnel distribution is fairly even as well. The other guilds are evidently far behind these 2 guilds, Unyielding Heart analyzed. No. When Mu Lingsha took a look at Frost Heaven's statistics, she was slightly surprised. Frost Heaven isn't doing too badly either. It has teams on 7 islands. If comparing based on the number of islands occupied, Frost Heaven could rank 12th out of the 30 participating superpowers. It was only 2 islands behind Miracle and Sacred Temple. No. Of the 7 islands Frost Heaven has been allocated to, 2 islands don't even have 500 players on it. Moreover, Unyielding Soul couldn't help shaking his head and sighing after carefully reading Frost Heaven's data. While Mu Lingsha and Unyielding Heart were discussing Frost Heaven, many other powers in the VIP viewing rooms were doing the same. Some of these powers gloated over Frost Heaven's misfortune, while some sympathized with the guild. As to why everyone reacted in such a way, it was because Black Flame, who was considered Frost Heaven's saving grace, had actually been assigned to island number 3, a large island. And worse, Black Flame's team was merely a 100-man team. He would be up against the teams of 16 superpowers on island number 3. Even the 5 great super guilds were present in full. The competition here was simply nightmarish in difficulty. It would be a fool's dream to try and secure a resource node with only a 100-man team. In addition, Frost Heaven only had 2 teams on island number 7, a medium island. One of them was a 100-man team led by Aqua Rose, while the other was a 300-man team led by one of Frost Heaven's elders. The 2 teams combined didn't even have 500 players. In comparison, the 8 other guilds on the island had between 1,000 to 2,000 players each. To make matters worse, the teams led by Frost Heaven's 7 wonders Hong Xingyuan and 5 elders actually got assigned to island number 17. In total, the guild had 2,500 players assigned to a measly small island. Guild leader Black Flame, what should we do? Mushin inevitably grew anxious after learning of the various island situations. The guild leader's side won't have any problems, but we only have our team and Gentle Snow's 100-man team here. This was undoubtedly the worst possible scenario for Frost Heaven. Initially, they had been hoping for Shi Feng to be sent to a small island. And so long as the number of guild members on that island reached 1,000, occupying 2 resource nodes on that island shouldn't be a problem. 2 resource nodes worth of guild points would be more than enough to propel Frost Heaven to the top 5 rankings of that island. After all, a small island only had 12 resource nodes. With so many guilds competing for the nodes, there wouldn't be enough for each competing guild to secure one. Now, however, Shi Feng had ended up on a large island with only 200 friendly players. In this situation, the most he could do was occupy 1 resource node, which would basically be useless. Moreover, as Shi Feng was foreign aid, he would get only half the points official participants would get. On the other hand, 7 Wonders' side should have no problem occupying 2 resource nodes. In fact, they had too many people for the task. However, securing a 3rd node on the small island would be difficult since a small island had only 12 resource nodes. If Frost Heaven occupied too many, the other superpowers would join hands to target Frost Heaven. This is still a relatively good start, Shi Feng said calmly as he inspected the distribution information. Let's meet up with Snow's team for now. A good start. Mushin fell speechless momentarily. In the current situation, the chances of Frost Heaven securing the 6th reserve seat were incredibly slim. However, what Mushin didn't know was that Shi Feng had hoped to be assigned to a medium or large island. After all, only medium and large islands had advanced resource nodes. As foreign aid, he would receive only half the points of official participants. Hence, securing an advanced node was a must if he wished to have an impact. His random assignment to a large island couldn't be considered bad luck. If he had gotten assigned to a small island, now that would be truly bad luck. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. During the time Shi Feng's team was converging with Gentle Snow's team, a 1,000-man team was slowly traversing a dense forest on island number 3. Meanwhile, the cool-headed youth leading the team was currently staring at a 100-man team several hundred yards away, with scorching flames blazing in his eyes. Black Flame, it seems your luck has finally run out. If you have to blame someone, blame yourself for arranging your teams in such a way. Now, I will let you know the consequences of going against me. Excitement filled Thousand Miles' eyes as he looked at Gentle Snow and her team in the distance. Vice Guild Leader Miles, we have already scouted the vicinity. There are no other guilds nearby, a level 118 Tier 3 Ranger reported through the team chat. Good. Thousand Miles grew even more excited at this piece of news. He then announced through the team chat, since no other guilds are nearby, we don't need to be polite. Everyone charge. Let's kill this Vice Guild leader of Zero Wing first and collect some interest. Yes, sir. At Thousand Miles' command, Miracle's members, lurking excitedly in the forest, prepared to ambush Gentle Snow's team. They would make sure that her team had nowhere to be run. /B. Chapter 2719, Gentle Snows soared above the competition venue, inside a VIP room. This is bad. Miracle's Thousand Miles discovered Gentle Snow's team. Flourishing Willow said nervously as she stared at a dense forest on island number 3. Gentle Snow will be in trouble. Thousand Miles' team is a 1,000-man team. The experts on Thousand Miles' team are astonishing. I'm afraid there are at least a dozen peak experts and 2 apex experts. Galaxy Past, the Star Alliance's guild leader, also frowned when he saw this situation. As a guild of Starmoon Kingdom, the Star Alliance had frequently clashed with Gentle Snow's Ouroboros during the early stages of the game. In fact, Galaxy Past had even treated Gentle Snow as his rival. Hence, Galaxy Past paid close attention to Zero Wing in this competition. This was especially so for his ex-rival Gentle Snow. Galaxy Past had even set Gentle Snow as a priority target on the spectator's interface. So long as she fought in a battle, he would be notified of it immediately. The gap between the two sides is too large. Purple Eye, who was now a level 117 Tier 3 Great Mage, shook her head and sighed. If Gentle Snow were leading Zero Wing's main force, she might still stand a chance. However, with her strength alone, there's no way her team can win. Even escaping will be a problem. Although the Star Alliance had been in conflict with Ouroboros and even the current Zero Wing, as guilds originating from Starmoon Kingdom and peak experts from the same kingdom, Purple Eye still hoped to see Gentle Snow and Zero Wing perform well in this competition. Damn it. If only we could join the battle. The other Star Alliance upper echelon present also sighed and grumbled. They never thought that Gentle Snow's team would be so unlucky as to encounter a 1,000-man team right off the bat. Miracle has started moving. Gentle Snow, why haven't you noticed them yet? Flourishing Willow reflexively stood up in worry and pointed at Miracle's members on the holographic projection. A 100 versus 1,000 battle already placed Gentle Snow's team in an overwhelming disadvantage. Moreover, Miracle's team was even stuffed with experts, while Frost Heaven's members were obviously no good. Even the strongest among them had reached only the refinement realm. Most of them weren't even at the half-step refinement realm standard. Let alone Miracle's experts, even the Star Alliance's main force could trounce these Tier 3 experts from Frost Heaven. However, despite the Star Alliance's members' thoughts and shouts, Miracle's experts had already sneaked within 100 yards of Gentle Snow's team. 4 Tier 3 players, such a distance required only a few steps to cross. Gentle Snow's team had no chance to flee now. Good. Magic team, start chanting. 1,000 Miles commanded after his team arrived within the critical range. He then turned to the 2 elderly men beside him and said, Elder Rock, Elder Feather, I'll leave Gentle Snow to you too. Do not let her get away. Rest assured, Vice Guild Leader. Leave that young lady to these 2 old men. Elder Rock, a white-bearded old man clad in black robes and armed with 2 pitch-black short swords, answered. If we take action, she won't have a chance to escape. Elder Feather, an old man with golden pupils, said, smiling. He wore dark gray leather armor and carried a white-winged feather bow. I am naturally confident in your abilities. Both of you are our guild's top-ranking ambushers. However, Gentle Snow isn't an easy target either. In terms of combat power, she rivals domain realm experts already. Killing her will definitely deal a huge blow to Zero Wing, 1,000 Miles said, smiling. 1,000 Miles felt reassured that Elder Rock and Elder Feather were taking action. After all, the 2 elders could hold their ground even against a peerless expert if they worked together. This was why the guild had let these 2 elders join a 1,000-man team. However, he did not wish to repeat his mistakes. He would use everything he had even to deal with a minor problem. When 1,000 Miles finished speaking, the magical class players in the team had also completed the incantations for their spells. Vice Guild Leader, all preparations are done. We can make them disappear from the island at your command. A level 118 Tier 3 Great Mage reported quietly. Good. 1,000 Miles did not doubt his subordinate's words at all, since the 20 magical class players had jointly cast 8 destruction spells. These powerful spells would devastate even level 120 mythic monsters, let alone Tier 3 players. The magical class players on the team grew excited. After all, they rarely had an opportunity to use such high-caliber spells. The bosses in dungeons normally wouldn't give them a chance to cast such spells. Only during siege battles would they have such an opportunity. Now that they could use Gentle Snow's team for target practice, they were naturally more than happy to do so. Immediately, 1,000 Miles turned to look at Gentle Snow's team. However, the instant 1,000 Miles turned around, his entire body shuddered. Before anyone noticed, Gentle Snow had already appeared before his team's magical class players. The Tier 3 Great Mage that reported to him was even laughing, wholly unaware of Gentle Snow's arrival. Not good. We got discovered. 1,000 Miles shouted instinctively. At this moment, 1,000 Miles wasn't the only person to have noticed Gentle Snow's sudden appearance. The other Miracle members noticed her too. Only their minds failed to react to the situation. Gentle Snow, who had used Instant Flash to arrive before her ambushers, had no intention of giving her opponents time to react. She immediately swung the Glorious Will replica, which had already been upgraded to the fragmented legendary rank, at the Tier 3 Great Mage, leading Miracle's magical class players. Gentle Snow's slash was straightforward, so fast that the Great Mage could only watch as her sword descended. He didn't even have time to dodge using instantaneous movement. The next moment the Great Mage was cleaved in half, and his HP plummeted straight to 0. What a quick slash. 1,000 Miles couldn't help gasping when he saw his subordinate getting killed. The Great Mage in question was a Void Realm expert. Normally, so long as his opponent made any movements, he would instantly sense his opponent's intentions and react appropriately. Moreover, all magical class players possessed skills or spells like instantaneous movement. Hence, in order to finish the Great Mage in one hit, even Domain Realm experts had to launch an attack without the Great Mage's awareness of the situation. However, despite Gentle Snow executing an attack right before the Great Mage's eyes, the latter had actually failed to respond to it. "Little girl, you are really courageous. Aren't you afraid of making a one-way trip?" Elder Feather sneered as he looked at Gentle Snow. However, despite his confident words, he still observed Gentle Snow cautiously. He then privately whispered to Elder Rock, "It seems this little girl is much stronger than we imagined, Old Rock. I'll try to create an opportunity for you in a moment. Leave it to me." The black-clad Elder Rock also understood that the woman before them shouldn't be underestimated. Immediately, the short swords he held behind his back bloomed with a pitch-black brilliance. As soon as there was an opening, he would use his strongest move to finish off Gentle Snow. However, before Elder Feather and Elder Rock could make their move, Gentle Snow seemed to see through their intentions already. Before the two elderly men realized it, 16 swords of light were flying at them, the abrupt attack catching them off guard. To make matters worse, they actually couldn't perceive the presence of these 16 light swords. Damn it. Immediately, both Elder Feather and Elder Rock used their life-saving skills simultaneously. The next moment, a storm brewed around Elder Feather, who was a Tier 3 ranger, the storm deflecting all attacks around him. As for Elder Rock, who was a Tier 3 assassin, he executed bewildering footwork and instantly split into 6 identical copies of himself. It was impossible to tell the real one from the fakes. After Elder Feather and Elder Rock, 1,000 Miles was the quickest to react among the Miracle members present. He raised his divine skeleton shield and dark red battle axe and charged at Gentle Snow, leaving behind an afterimage. Tier 3 skill Triple Purgatory Flash. The next moment, 1,000 Miles brandished his axe and summoned 3 black crescents that attacked Gentle Snow from 3 different directions. The attack was so fast that even Domain Realm experts had to focus all their attention on it if they wished to dodge or block it. However, 1,000 Miles did not see Gentle Snow paying any attention to him. As if he were only an ant by the roadside, she completely ignored his existence. Die. Feeling extremely humiliated by Gentle Snow's attitude, 1,000 Miles bellowed in anger. Simultaneously, the 3 black crescents' power also strengthened slightly, enough to shatter space itself. However, 1,000 Miles quickly felt despair overwhelm him. Even now, Gentle Snow still ignored him. She merely swung her great sword at the crescent approaching her from the front. Immediately afterward, the black crescent deflected along the greatsword's trajectory and smashed into the 2 other black crescents. To 1,000 Miles' surprise, after the latter 2 crescents got struck, their courses actually deviated toward himself. How is this possible? 1,000 Miles was dumbfounded. Although he wanted to repulse these 2 black crescents, his body simply couldn't react in time. Boom. Boom. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. 2 dull sounds appeared and 1,000 Miles stumbled 2 consecutive steps backward. Each step was accompanied by a significant loss of HP. By the end of the attack, 2 deep cuts had appeared on his armor, and his HP had fallen below 50%. Just when 1,000 Miles thought he could catch a breather, he noticed that his surroundings were surprisingly quiet. You guys, what happened? 1,000 Miles couldn't help his confusion when he saw his teammates' shocked expressions. However, before 1,000 Miles could take in the situation, another black crescent flew across his neck and left behind a black line in space and a flying head. Chapter 27:20 Beyond the Domain Realm. When 1,000 Miles' body collapsed to the ground, the Miracle members in the dense forest shuddered involuntarily. The Star Alliance's members spectating in their VIP viewing room also gaped in shock. How did she become so strong? Purple Eye exclaimed in disbelief. Not only did Gentle Snow slay a Tier 3 peak expert after going deep into Miracle's ranks, but she had also taken the initiative to attack 2 Domain Realm experts. While doing so, she had even casually killed the Purgatory Knight 1,000 Miles. The last part, where Gentle Snow faced 1,000 Miles, was especially amazing. 1,000 Miles should have generated those 3 black crescents using a skill, yet Gentle Snow had made it look as if she was the one who summoned them. It was simply unbelievable. Has the gap between us gotten so big already? Galaxy Past was at a loss for words as he stared at Gentle Snow's figure in the holographic projection. They were both Star Moon Kingdom's top-ranking experts, yet it was now obvious that the actual gap between them was massive. They were already in completely different worlds. Guild leader, I plan to leave Star Moon Kingdom temporarily after this competition. I want to explore other places, Flourishing Willow said. She was similarly shocked by Gentle Snow's strength and felt unreconciled. The gap between them clearly hadn't been so massive before. Both of them were experts ranked in the God's Domain experts list. Now, however, Flourishing Willow doubted she could survive even one move against Gentle Snow. How could she possibly accept this situation? Sure. Galaxy Past did not question Flourishing Willow's decision. On the contrary, he turned to Purple Eye and asked, "How about you take a look outside too? The guild doesn't have many matters to deal with now and I can handle them by myself." "Thank you, guild leader." Purple Eye nodded while gritting her teeth. "I won't disappoint you." Although the Star Alliance normally mingled in Star Moon Kingdom's neighboring countries as well, compared to Zero Wing, whose members fought all over God's Domain, the Star Alliance's chessboard was truly insignificant and laughable. During the time the Star Alliance's members were in shock, the members of Miracle inside the dense forest were likewise stunned. As if they had just encountered a ferocious monster, every one of them stood stock still. One move. Gentle Snow had killed 1,000 Miles in just one move. With such strength, she already rivaled peerless experts. Elder Rock and Elder Feather, who had successfully evaded Gentle Snow's attack, were dazed, fear and confusion coloring their faces. Impossible. How can a little girl like you reach such a realm? Elder Rock couldn't help doubting his eyes as he gazed at Gentle Snow. I never thought anyone could reach that realm at such a young age. Am I really getting too old? Elder Feather also turned somewhat silly as he looked at Gentle Snow. They hadn't thought much of it when they saw Gentle Snow kill the Void Realm Great Mage. However, after seeing Gentle Snow kill 1,000 Miles, they finally understood what happened. The woman before them wasn't some powerful expert rivaling Domain Realm experts. Instead, she was an existence that had transcended the Domain Realm. When the 2 elderly men looked at the young lady before them, they suddenly felt they had lived their lives in vain. After all, they had racked their brains just to reach the Domain Realm's upper stage, yet Gentle Snow was already beyond the Domain Realm. How could they not despair at this discovery? Even in veteran super guilds, anyone capable of reaching the Domain Realm's upper stage was generally over 60 years old already. As for the existences that had transcended the Domain Realm and reached the higher Domain Realm, they were true old monsters. These existences were the mainstays of the 5 great super guilds. However, during the time Elder Rock and Elder Feather were in a daze, Miracle's other Tier 3 experts regained their senses and suddenly charged at Gentle Snow. Kill. This woman killed Vice Guild Leader Miles. We must not let her leave alive. That's right. In this special space, even peerless experts can't afford to duke it out with us. The next moment, over 100 Guardian Knights and Shield Warriors activated their defensive skills and closed in on Gentle Snow. Simultaneously, the magical class players on the team started casting combination spells one after another. Old Rock, let's leave. It'll be too late otherwise. Elder Feather suggested as he glanced at Elder Rock. He then activated a skill without hesitation and transformed into a gale. He crossed several dozen yards with every step he took, showing no intention of fighting whatsoever. Snapping out of his daze, Elder Rock hurriedly used wind steps, which he had upgraded to Tier 3, and entered stealth. Elders. Miracle's members were stunned momentarily. What was up with this situation? Despite being the 2 strongest combatants in their 1,000-man team, Elder Rock and Elder Feather had actually fled. At this moment, let alone Miracle's members, Even the Star Alliance's spectating members couldn't help gaping in shock. What's going on? Why are those two apex experts running away? Despite having entered the flowing water realm already, Galaxy Past, Flourishing Willow and Purple Eye were bewildered by Elder Rock and Elder Feather's decision to flee. Domain realm experts were existences that even the various superpowers wouldn't want to offend casually. Not to mention both Elder Rock and Elder Feather had clearly made significant progress in the domain realm already. The two of them working together could most likely go up against peerless experts. Not to mention they still had the 1,000-man team supporting them. Even a peerless expert wouldn't want to clash head-on with such a force. Yet the two apex experts had actually fled. While everyone was bewildered by this situation, Gentle Snow executed a vertical leap, vanishing from sight. When she reappeared, she was standing 50 yards away from her original position. The glorious will in her hands bloomed with dazzling brilliance. Will of light. Instantly, 12 brilliant flashes streaked through the dense vegetation, brightly illuminating the entire forest. What is she doing? Frost Heaven's members who were spectating the fight from a distance were confused. Likewise, Miracle's members also found this situation odd. They couldn't help wondering why Gentle Snow would launch an attack at empty air. Who could she possibly hit? However, this thought lasted for only half a second in everyone's mind. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Boom. A deafening boom spread through the area. Immediately afterward, web-like cracks formed within the dense forest space and spread up to 300 yards away from the explosion's epicenter. Then the entire region collapsed. The cracked space transformed into a pitch-black area with space and time in disarray. A boundless spatial storm subsequently raged through the area, devouring all of Miracle's members. Even Elder Rock and Elder Feather, who had escaped beforehand, got swept up in this chaotic storm, their HPs draining like running water. Several seconds later, the shattered space started returning to normal. However, at this point Miracle's 1,000-man team was nowhere in sight. And from above the island, it looked as if a huge meteorite had struck the dense forest, leaving behind only a huge impact crater. What exactly did she do? Chapter 27-21, Uproar. Guild Leader, did you see that? Purple Eye goggled in shock as she pointed at the huge crater in the holographic projection. Gentle Snow. How did she do that? Gentle Snow should have destroyed the space in the surrounding area to annihilate Miracle's 1,000-man team, Galaxy Past answered calmly. No. I know that, but I'm not referring to that, Purple Eye said, shaking her head. She then turned to Galaxy Past and continued. I'm talking about Gentle Snow's 12 consecutive slashes. She actually stacked the power of those 12 slashes. It was challenging to combine the power of multiple sources. The more sources one tried to combine, the greater the difficulty. In fact, the difficulty increased exponentially. Even apex experts who had reached the domain realm could, at best, combine the power of 6 attacks. Yet now, Gentle Snow had actually combined 12 attacks into one. Moreover, she had accomplished this feat while wielding a great sword. This was no longer a matter of strength. Such a feat should be impossible for humans. Gentle Snow was a genius of their generation. They had also entered God's domain at the same time. Even if Gentle Snow had made rapid progress, reaching such a level should be possible for her. At this point she couldn't even be considered human anymore. She was a monster in human skin. Purple, calm down, Galaxy Past advised. You should be aware of Zero Wing's strength. Zero Wing has always been able to accomplish feats other guilds can't. Gentle Snow might have learned a powerful skill that allowed her to perform such an action. Galaxy Past could sympathize with Purple Eye's unreconciled and helpless feelings. After all, this kind of power already exceeded the realm of humans. It was no exaggeration to say that Gentle Snow had become an existence that they would never surpass in their lifetimes. Meanwhile, inside a lounge in Miracle's headquarters in the real world, the lids of 2 virtual gaming cabins opened slowly. We still died. We didn't even have a chance to escape. With this, we'll have to wait even longer before we can start our Tier 4 promotions. Elder Rock grumbled as he sat up in his gaming cabin, a bitter smile forming on his face. We are lucky. If this were the preliminaries, we would have lost 5 levels. Elder Feather frowned as he sat up in his cabin. A hint of awe appearing in his eyes, he continued, truly, that kind of monster isn't something we can go up against. She actually destroyed the entire space to prevent us from escaping. Even short-duration invulnerability skills are useless against that kind of attack. 1,000 miles truly screwed us over. His information is absurdly inaccurate, Elder Rock snarled. In hindsight, that little girl is the real monster, not Black Flame. However, it's fortunate we came across her so soon. There is still time to salvage this situation, Elder Feather said, smiling. What do you mean, Old Feather? Elder Rock asked, puzzled. I relayed this information to the guild leader before we got killed. I'm sure the others know about this by now, Elder Feather said. Now that it is revealed that Frost Heaven has a higher domain realm expert in addition to Black Flame, I'm sure you should know what this means. Are you saying the guild leader will relay this information to the other superpowers? Elder Rock couldn't help growing a little excited. That was a higher domain realm expert they were talking about. On island number 3, there was no way Black Flame could cause an upset by himself. However, it would be a different story if a higher domain realm expert were added to the equation. Zero Wing might actually be able to secure 2 resource nodes and become the 6th-ranked guild on island number 3. In that case, Frost Heaven's chances of winning the 6th reserve seat would increase significantly. However, once Miracle spread this information, the various superpowers would most likely band together to prevent Frost Heaven from ousting them. Just as Elder Feather assumed, Miracle did not conceal Gentle Snow's information. On the contrary, the guild publicized it throughout the arena. Every participating guild became aware of Gentle Snow's existence. Higher domain realm? Zero Wing actually had such an expert? Could Miracle be lying to us? That's the higher domain realm we are talking about. How can a little girl like Gentle Snow reach it? That shouldn't be the case. According to our members on island number 3, Gentle Snow did indeed clash with one of Miracle's 1,000-man teams. Moreover, their fight created quite a commotion. It could be heard even from miles away. After our members inspected the battlefield through magical observation, they found that Miracle's 1,000-man team had indeed been annihilated. Moreover, Gentle Snow had even wiped out Miracle's team with just one move. For a time, the various participating guilds had heated discussions over this matter. Although most of them remained dubious of the claim that Gentle Snow had reached the higher domain realm, they were still afraid of her. The higher domain realm was a secret among the various superpowers. Ordinary players weren't even aware of its existence. Currently, those who had reached the higher domain realm were old monsters belonging to the 5 great super guilds, and these old monsters almost never revealed themselves to the public. In fact, the public had mostly forgotten about them. However, the various superpowers understood that the reason the 5 great super guilds could be referred to as such was precisely because of these existences. So long as this group of old monsters took action, even peerless experts wouldn't be able to stop them. After all, peerless experts were merely a bunch of people still stuck in the domain realm. Even the stronger ones had reached only the domain realm's upper stage. A more significant part of the reason peerless experts were called as such was their basic attributes, which far surpassed those of other domain realm experts. However, it was a different story for higher domain realm experts. These existences possessed inhuman combat standards. Moreover, there was almost no trial in God's domain that could trouble them. They could easily overcome the hurdles they faced and secure as many opportunities as they wanted in God's domain. One could say that in terms of both basic attributes and combat standards, higher domain realm experts far surpassed peerless experts. Even one such existence could turn the tide of a war. Now that Gentle Snow was suspected of having reached the higher domain realm as well, the various superpowers would have no choice but to take precautions against her. Meanwhile, when Frost Heaven's members heard this piece of news, every one of them was shocked. How is this possible? That Vice Guild leader from Zero Wing is actually in the higher domain realm. Brilliant Blue felt like he was dreaming when he read his subordinate's report. He simply couldn't bring himself to believe it. This was the higher domain realm they were talking about. However, at this time the various participating superpowers were all talking about this matter. Moreover, the Frost Heaven members with Gentle Snow acknowledged that she had single-handedly wiped out Miracle's 1,000-man team. Miracle even publicly admitted that Gentle Snow had killed Rock and Feather, 2 of Miracle's elders, in a single move. After taking all these factors into account, this matter was almost certain to be true. The heavens haven't forsaken Frost Heaven. 7 Wonders grew ecstatic upon hearing this news. He then looked at Hong Xingyan, who had reported the matter to him, and said, "Old Hong, you've really found a huge treasure for our guild this time. Guild leader, you overestimate me." Hong Xingyan shook his head with a smile. In reality, even he had not been aware that Gentle Snow had reached the higher domain realm. Had he known, he wouldn't have offered just 3 upper zone reserve slots to Zero Wing. Meanwhile, when Muxin on island number 3 received the news about Gentle Snow, she was lost in thought for a long time. Black Flame. Is Gentle Snow really at the higher domain realm? Muxin couldn't help asking Shi Feng. Probably. Shi Feng chuckled. Probably? What do you mean, probably? Has she reached it or not? Muxin got irritated at Shi Feng for persisting in keeping her in the dark. The various superpowers already believed that Gentle Snow was a higher domain realm expert. Yet Shi Feng was still so close-mouthed about it. Shi Feng couldn't help smiling bitterly at Muxin's reaction. Truthfully, he didn't actually know what realm Gentle Snow had reached. After all, he didn't know what kind of world the higher domain realm was. In addition, when he looked at Gentle Snow, he felt as if he was looking at a cloud. He couldn't see through her at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, while he didn't know whether Gentle Snow was currently at the higher domain realm, he was sure of one thing: Gentle Snow was undoubtedly number 1 in the world in combat experience. However, Miracle has played a really vicious move this time. Shi Feng frowned as he read Miracle's public announcement. At Shi Feng's words, Muxin's face darkened. Are you saying Miracle plans to kill with a borrowed sword? That's right. Shi Feng nodded. On the surface, Miracle is expressing its indignation over Gentle Snow annihilating one of its 1,000-man teams. In reality, it is announcing to the other guilds that Frost Heaven has a great chance of securing the 6th seat. This way, the other guilds will have to consider banding together to target Frost Heaven. What should we do then? Muxin understood how vicious Miracle's move was. If they didn't handle this matter properly, Frost Heaven might come under attack from all sides. Should I notify my guild leader of this? Shi Feng sneered. Since Miracle wants Frost Heaven to become a thorn in the various guilds' eyes, we'll make the various guilds understand that the 6th seat belongs to us. Chapter 27-22. No regrets. Have the various guilds acknowledge us? Muxin revealed a wry smile when she heard Shi Feng's words. But out of the 6 reserve seats available, only 1 is obtainable. How can the other guilds possibly give up on it? There are 6 reserve seats up for grabs, yet the various guilds have given up on 5 of them. Why do you think that's the case? Shi Feng responded with a question of his own. Isn't that obvious? It's because the 5 great super guilds are too strong. There's no way the other guilds can compete with them, Muxin answered, failing to understand why Shi Feng asked such a question. Who the owners of 5 of the 6 reserve seats were was common knowledge for everyone. Otherwise, the various guilds wouldn't be competing so desperately for the 6th seat, with some guilds even risking everything they had. That's right. It is because those 5 super guilds are sufficiently strong, Shi Feng said, nodding. Hence, those guilds don't dare compete with them. Do you mean to make the various guilds deem us too strong to provoke? That's impossible, Muxin said, shaking her head. She felt that Shi Feng was building castles in the air. Frost Heaven doesn't have that kind of strength right now. Indeed. Frost Heaven doesn't have the necessary strength right now, Shi Feng said unceremoniously. That's why we need to go crazy, so crazy that the other guilds become afraid of us. Only by doing so do we stand a chance of victory. They couldn't afford to act defensively. And even if they did, they wouldn't be able to protect anything in a situation where every other guild, aside from the 5 great super guilds, were Frost Heaven's enemies. Even Shi Feng couldn't turn the tide of battle. After all, this was a competition for resource nodes, not a contest of strength. Even if he occupied every resource node on an island, there were still 17 other islands. Frost Heaven would still lose. Not to mention, occupying an entire island would be a challenge even for him. The size of island number 3 was like a level 100 neutral map. If the various guilds players hid from him, he would have great difficulty locating them, regardless of his mana domain. Moreover, every participating player was a tier 3 expert. When not subjected to any debuffs, they could run very fast. In addition, he would have to occupy the many resource nodes on the island while also ensuring their safety. How do we do that? Even if we go crazy, we still need a target. Muxin understood what Shi Feng was saying. However, she found it truly hard to imagine how they could make the various guilds fear them and actively give up on competing with them. Of course we have one. Smiling, Shi Feng added, and it's even ready-made. Are you talking about Miracle? Shaking her head, Muxin argued. Although Miracle has used a trick to deal with us, even if we annihilate Miracle, I'm afraid the other guilds still won't rest. No. Not Miracle. How can Miracle possibly be qualified for such a role? Shi Feng smiled while shaking his head. Didn't you already mention which guilds the other guilds don't dare to offend? Muxin gasped involuntarily when she heard Shi Feng's words. Are you saying, that's right. The 5 great super guilds? Shi Feng nodded. Of course we won't have to target all 5 of them. Going for mythology should be more than enough. In his previous life, Miracle had relied on mythology to secure one of the reserve seats during the first official competition. Since he was already going against Miracle in this life, it was only a matter of time before he had to deal with mythology. In that case he might as well strike first to gain an advantage. Isn't this a little too crazy? That's one of the 5 great super guilds we are talking about. Muxin couldn't help feeling a little afraid at the mention of making an enemy out of one of the 5 great super guilds. The 5 great super guilds were like the sun in the virtual gaming industry. While most guilds might declare their intent to surpass the 5 great super guilds, it was another thing altogether to actually fight one. For the various superpowers, the stronger they grew, the more fearful of the 5 great super guilds they became. After all, the depth of the 5 great super guilds' foundations was simply unfathomable. This isn't madness. Shi Feng shook his head. In an earnest tone he said, this is Frost Heaven's only way out. Whether you secure a seat will depend on your decision. Afterward, Shi Feng stopped trying to convince Muxin and had her relay this proposal to 7 Wonders. Whether they went through with his plan or not would depend on Frost Heaven's guild leader. Declare war on mythology? Is Black Flame insane? Brilliant Blue trembled when he received Shi Feng's suggestion. Immediately he contacted 7 Wonders and protested, Guild leader, that's one of the 5 great super guilds we are talking about. Even 3 Frost Heavens wouldn't be a match for it. I understand. 7 Wonders also wore a gloomy face. Helplessly he said, however we only have 2 options if we wish to secure a reserve seat. One is to fight the numerous participating guilds, and the other is to fight mythology. There are no other options. Miracle's ploy was simply too vicious. If Frost Heaven went up against the various superpowers, it wouldn't stand a chance whatsoever. After all, in this scenario Frost Heaven would lose the initiative to attack other guilds, constrained to defending its territories. However, how could it possibly defend against so many guilds with its limited numbers? Frost Heaven's only other option was to attack mythology. If Frost Heaven succeeded in causing mythology to suffer even a minor setback, it would still be of great help to Frost Heaven in securing the 6th reserve seat. Meanwhile, after 7 Wonders finished speaking, Brilliant Blue also sank into deep thought. We have only one choice now. Looking at Brilliant Blue's face on his screen, 7 Wonders asked, do we fight or not? Guild leader, even if I wish to fight, how do we go about it? That's mythology we are talking about. We stand no chance whatsoever, Brilliant Blue said with a bitter smile. The island number 11 he was assigned to had only 3 teams from Frost Heaven, his own 500-man team, a 300-man team led by an elder, and Violet Cloud's 100-man team for a total of 900 players. On the other hand, mythology had a total of 2,600 members on island number 11. Moreover, the person leading this force was the divine spear demon Rex, the commander of mythology's trump card legion and a legendary figure even in mythology. Do you think the other islands have a chance of winning? 7 Wonders rolled his eyes at Brilliant Blue. Mythology's members were distributed very evenly. Any island it had a presence on had at least 2,000 mythology members. And of the 7 islands Frost Heaven's teams were assigned to, only island number 17 did not have mythology's presence. However, you don't need to hurry. Group up with Zero Wings members first before taking action, 7 Wonders said. I understand. Even if I have to put my life on the line, I will make mythology suffer. Brilliant Blue did not oppose 7 Wonders' decision. This upcoming battle would decide whether Frost Heaven would rise or fall. Afterward, 7 Wonders relayed his command to the Frost Heaven members on the other islands. In 2 hours, They would launch a simultaneous assault on mythology's resource nodes on Frost Heaven's 6 islands. As Frost Heaven's members waited quietly for their fateful moment, fierce battles occurred one after another on the various islands. The savage clash between superpowers thoroughly dumbfounded the spectating major powers. They never thought that the foundations of these superpowers would be so astonishing. If not for this competition, none of them would even suspect that the various superpowers' younger generation had already developed to such a frightening extent. Not only had many of these younger generation talents reached the Void Realm already, but some had even reached the Domain Realm. Given enough time, these Domain Realm youths would definitely become leading lights in God's domain. Shortly after the first bout of battles, the various resource nodes also fell under the ownership of players. To no one's surprise, the 5 great super guilds held an overwhelming advantage over the other participating superpowers. Close at their heels were Miracle and Sacred Temple. Both Miracle and Sacred Temple had managed to rank 6th on 5 of the islands they were assigned to. If this situation persisted, there was no doubt that the 6th reserve seat's owner would emerge from one of them. However, as everyone was guessing which of these 2 guilds would secure the 6th seat, some spectating players and participating guilds noticed a peculiarity. What's going on with Frost Heaven? They're not even trying to compete for resource nodes. I know, right? Aside from ranking 5th on island number 17, they haven't taken any action on the 6 other islands. They're not giving up, are they? Have they gotten scared? Many of the participating guilds laughed at Frost Heaven's performance. Initially, Frost Heaven should have had a high chance of winning because of the dark horse known as Zero Wing. However, it was also because of Zero Wing's existence that Frost Heaven did not dare compete with the various superpowers lest it be ganged upon. Vice Guild Leader, do you think Frost Heaven will give up just like that? When White Feather read the summary on the battle situation, she couldn't help growing curious about Frost Heaven's behavior. It's not impossible. Miracle's ploy is truly vicious. So long as Frost Heaven dares make a move, every other guild will target it. Smiling faintly, Cold Shadow said, "What a pity. If Frost Heaven hadn't invited Zero Wing, it might have had a chance to fight for the 6th seat. Now it has no chance at all." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this moment, Cold Shadow wasn't the only person who thought that Frost Heaven had given up. The various participating superpowers believed the same and deemed it a wise decision. After all, if Frost Heaven chose to fight, it would only end up getting annihilated. Conserving its strength to fight next year was undoubtedly the better choice. While the various guilds were watching their guild points rise, Frost Heaven's members were sneaking up to mythology's resource nodes, their hearts pounding with anxiety and excitement. After glancing at the distant advanced resource node that mythology guarded tightly, Shi Feng checked the time. It's time. Move out. Chapter 27-23. Arena shaken. The scorching sun was high up in the sky, and the sea breeze blowing through the islands was calm. The embers of war on the various islands were weakening. At this point, aside from attacking and occupying more resource nodes, what was more important for the participating superpowers was defending their resource nodes. Hence, any guild that had secured resource nodes would be able to allocate only a small portion of their manpower to fight for more resource nodes. Due to this reason, the balance between the guilds stabilized. At this rate, the struggle for the 6th seat should be between Miracle and Sacred Temple. A hint of envy flashed in Mu Lingsha's eyes when she saw the various islands' resource node distribution data. Although the winners of this competition wouldn't join the ranks of the 12 great guilds and couldn't garrison an entire empire, the reserve seats still allowed guilds to garrison the cities of an empire. In addition, reserve guilds could also garrison powerful kingdoms and be worshipped by the kingdom. At that time, they could directly influence the development of the kingdom. In fact, reserve guilds could initiate kingdom wars to plunder the resources of other countries and expand their own kingdom's territory and resources. At that time, the resources the reserve guilds could obtain would far surpass that of other guilds, making it impossible for other guilds to catch up. All the other guilds would be able to do was watch as the reserve guilds grew stronger by the day. However, Frost Heaven is behaving really strangely. Unyielding Heart studied the battlefield's stabilizing situation in puzzlement. Frost Heaven clearly had a chance to secure the 6th seat before. There's no reason for it not to put up a fight. After all, the various guilds banding together is only a possibility. So long as Frost Heaven doesn't behave too aggressively right off the bat, I'm sure those guilds won't deliberately join hands. At most they will come to a tacit understanding to contain Frost Heaven. Frost Heaven has already missed its chance. Even if it tries to fight now, it doesn't have a ghost of a chance of winning, Mu Lingsha countered, shaking her head. Now that the situation between the guilds was stabilizing, Frost Heaven would have difficulty snatching resource nodes. And if it really started snatching resource nodes, the various guilds would definitely gang up on it. This was because the various guilds all understood one thing. Every one of them would secretly cooperate with this tacit understanding. And the result of such thinking would be that the various guilds really would act on their thoughts, annihilate Frost Heaven and fight over Frost Heaven's resource nodes. Hence, Frost Heaven truly did not have any chance of winning anymore. During Mu Lingsha and Unyielding Heart's conversation, their spectator interface suddenly sent them a notification. Black Flame is taking action. Mu Lingsha quickly redirected the interface to Island Number 3 and focused on Shi Feng, whom she had set as a priority target beforehand. Black Flame's moving at this time? What is he thinking? Unyielding Heart stared in confusion at Shi Feng, who was hiding in a forest, together with his team. It was pointless for Zero Wing to appear and compete for resource nodes at this point. Currently, out of the 18 islands, Frost Heaven occupied resource nodes on only Island Number 17. It hadn't claimed a single resource node on the other islands. Even if Zero Wing managed to secure 2 resource nodes on Island Number 3 and became the 6th-ranked guild there, it still wouldn't get Frost Heaven out of its rut. Wait. That's not right. Mu Lingsha gaped in shock when she saw the advanced resource node Shi Feng's team was charging at, her eyes wide with confusion and surprise. His goal seems to be mythology's advanced resource node. Unyielding Heart was similarly stunned by this situation. How dare he? That was mythology they were talking about. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds and an existence the various superpowers dreaded, yet Shi Feng was taking the initiative to provoke it. However, before Mu Lingsha and Unyielding Soul could recover from their shock, another notification appeared on their spectator interface, followed by a small image at the bottom of the screen. Is Zero Wing planning to wage war on mythology? Depicted in the smaller image was Gentle Snow leading her 100-man team in a charge against mythology's intermediate resource node on Island Number 3, and she showed no signs of stopping whatsoever. /Beak the Unyielding Soul members in the VIP room gasped at this abrupt change. How dare they? This action challenged mythology's authority. Moreover, regardless of whether Zero Wing succeeded or not, mythology definitely wouldn't let Zero Wing off the hook. Not to mention, Zero Wing had nothing to gain whatsoever from doing so. At this time, besides Unyielding Soul's members, the powers paying attention to Shi Feng and Gentle Snow were similarly dumbfounded by the two's actions. They never thought that Zero Wing would be so crazy as to challenge one of the 5 great super guilds directly. Wait. It's not just Black Flame and Gentle Snow. Zero Wing's other teams are also making a move against mythology's resource nodes. That's not all. Frost Heaven's teams are doing the same. The news of Zero Wing's and Frost Heaven's teams attacking mythology's resource nodes caused an instant sensation among the various major powers in the VIP viewing rooms. Everyone was shocked by the 2 guilds' actions. That's mythology we are talking about. How dare they? Frost Heaven and Zero Wing have truly lost their minds this time. Setting aside whether they will succeed or not, aren't they afraid of mythology's retaliation after the competition? Are they really not afraid that mythology will exterminate them? The various major powers felt puzzled by Zero Wing's and Frost Heaven's actions. They simply couldn't figure out what the 2 guilds were thinking. The 5 great super guilds' position in the virtual gaming industry was as stable as a mountain because no superpower dared to offend them. Any superpower that dared to do so would get eliminated from the industry without exception. Now that Zero Wing and Frost Heaven were openly provoking mythology in front of everyone in the world, mythology definitely wouldn't spare them in order to maintain its authority. Has Seven Wonders lost his mind? Cold Shadow was incensed when she read the report that mythology's resource nodes had come under attack on 6 islands. They actually dare provoke us? Do they not know what death is? She never thought that Zero Wing and Frost Heaven would pull such an astonishing move after remaining silent for so long. Moreover, they had even chosen to challenge one of the 5 great super guilds directly. This would definitely turn mythology into a laughingstock. Interesting. This is truly interesting. I wonder if that old drunken ghost is jumping in rage right about now? When a mighty middle-aged man with brown hair on island number 2 received news of Zero Wings and Frost Heaven's actions, he burst into laughter. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This middle-aged man was none other than the guild leader of Netherworld Empire, one of the 5 great super guilds. Guild leader, it is still too early to be happy. How can mythology's resource nodes be so easy to capture? Zero Wing and Frost Heaven are just looking to humiliate themselves, a tall man clad in dark gray armor said disdainfully. Zero Wing could be said to be a guild that had relied entirely on external aid to reach its current position. Although Black Flame and Gentle Snow indeed possessed noteworthy combat standards, they were still negligible existences in front of the 5 great super guilds. Regardless, having mythology lose some face is always a good thing, the middle-aged man said, chuckling. As for how long Zero Wing and Frost Heaven can last, that's not important. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds. It possessed trump cards beyond the imagination of ordinary superpowers. The forces it had stationed on the various large islands were particularly exceptional. Even working together, Black Flame and Gentle Snow would most likely have a tough time threatening any of mythology's resource nodes. Not to mention both of them were taking independent action. As the various powers were feeling surprised and shocked by Zero Wings and Frost Heaven's actions, Shi Feng's 100-man team had arrived before mythology's advanced resource node. Chapter 27-24, A Gap Beyond Imagination. It's starting. I wonder if Black Flame can snatch that advanced resource node? As I see it, with his mana domain, Black Flame should fear group battles the least. However, mythology's side isn't filled with pushovers either. The one leading the defense of that advanced resource node is the Silver Ghost, Prosciutto. The legion under him is amazing. I heard they killed a level 110 superior mythic ranked world boss some time ago. The feat sent waves across the entire western continent. Crap. They're that strong? In that case, Black Flame is really in danger. I heard that superior mythics all possess mana domains. Combined with their frightening basic attributes, it shouldn't be possible for players to defeat them. Everyone in the arena paid close attention to Shi Feng's 100-man team. It was no exaggeration to say that nobody present wished to miss out on this earth-shattering battle. Many of the major powers in the VIP viewing rooms had even stopped paying attention to the other battlefields and focused solely on Shi Feng's 100-man team. At this time, as if long prepared for this, mythology's members summoned a magic barrier as soon as Shi Feng's team arrived. The barrier covered a 500-yard radius, thoroughly enveloping the advanced resource node and Shi Feng's team. Under the magic barrier's oppressive power, not only did everyone on Shi Feng's team feel their bodies growing heavier, but even their basic attributes started falling rapidly. This is an advanced magic barrier? Mushin was shocked when she saw how much her basic attributes had fallen. How is this possible? Advanced magic barriers were incredibly rare in God's domain. Just one set of magic array scrolls for an advanced magic barrier was worth a fortune. However, as the current competition prohibited the use of magic tools, players could only rely on themselves to erect magic barriers. Only, there were strict requirements for players to use magic barriers without any external aid. Just casting an intermediate magic array required 100 players. Moreover, of these 100 players, 20 of them needed to be at the intermediate magician standard and 5 at the advanced magician standard. Otherwise, the magic array wouldn't operate. If intermediate magic arrays had such stringent requirements, one could easily imagine the requirements needed to summon an advanced magic array. Nevertheless, mythology's team had actually summoned one. This was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, an advanced magic barrier was capable of suppressing even mythic monsters. Needless to say, it would have a tremendous effect on Tier 3 players. At this time, Frost Heaven's members all wore pale expressions on their faces. They weren't even peak experts in the guild to begin with. Compared to the various superpowers teams, their basic attributes could only be considered average. Now that the magic barrier had reduced their basic attributes by 30%, how were they supposed to fight? So, this is mythology's foundation? Amazing! With this, even if Black Flame summons his mana domain, he will still have difficulty resisting the magic array's suppression. The audience gasped when they saw mythology's advanced magic barrier. On a battlefield that prohibited the use of magic tools, having the ability to summon advanced magic barriers would basically make one invincible. Of course, a magic barrier summoned entirely through the effort of players wasn't unbeatable. The greatest flaw of such a magic barrier was the immense burden on the caster's mana. If the players supporting the barrier did not replenish their mana, they wouldn't last more than 10 minutes. However, on this battlefield, 10 minutes were more than enough to decide the outcome. While everyone was marveling at mythology's capabilities, 100 players walked out of the advanced resource node. The person in the lead was a silver-haired young man with an amiable expression on his face. However, everyone present was aware that this friendly youth was also known as the Silver Ghost, one of the leaders of mythology's younger generation. Guild leader Black Flame, we meet again, Prosciutto greeted Shi Feng in an indescribably calm voice. He showed no eagerness for a showdown at all. Instead, he behaved as if he was chatting about family affairs. At Prosciutto's words, Mushin looked at Shi Feng in surprise. Prosciutto was a big celebrity in God's domain. He had risen to the position of vice commander in mythology's trump card legion at a young age and was the designated successor of the legion's monstrous commander. You know him. MHM. We've met once on the Western continent. Shi Feng nodded in response to Mushin's curiosity and surprise. There was no point in hiding the matter. After all, he had caused quite a huge scene in the Starlight Fortress, and most of the Western continent's superpowers probably knew about his clash with mythology already. You really are heartless with your words, Guild leader Black Flame, Prosciutto sighed. The fight in the Starlight Fortress is the only humiliation I've suffered ever since entering mythology. My memory of that fight is still fresh, yet you don't take it seriously at all. Humiliation. Smiling, Shi Feng said, that's hyperbole, right? Your Eminence only failed to have your way. No. It is already a humiliation for me, Prosciutto disagreed, shaking his head. Earnestly, he continued, previously I stated that we would meet again. Only our reunion happened much sooner than I expected. Although I still don't think the time is right, allow me to repay some of the humiliation I suffered before. As soon as Prosciutto finished speaking, the 100 Tier 3 experts behind him promptly released their auras. It immediately felt as if a demon god had descended onto the battlefield. Of the group of 100, over 30 peak experts exuded auras rivaling that of mythic monsters. The Frost Heaven members nearly collapsed to the ground under this pressure. This is an advanced combat array. Over 30 peak experts with strength rivaling mythic monsters? No. This must be an illusion. How can there be such a large gap between our guilds? At this time, the Frost Heaven members on Shi Feng's team weren't the only ones suffering a mental breakdown. Even the various major powers in the VIP viewing rooms were dumbfounded, despair flooding their hearts. Sure enough, the gap is much bigger than we thought. Unyielding Heart smiled bitterly as he looked at mythology's 100-man team. Yes, this was the 5 great super guilds' strength. The world had always regarded the various superpowers' existence as second only to the 5 great super guilds. However, these superpowers all knew full well that aside from a select few super guilds, every other superpower was far behind the 5 great super guilds. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to say that they were living in 2 different worlds. This was also why no single superpower dared to declare that they would replace the 5 great super guilds. It's over. It's really over now. How can the gap be this massive? Fear bloomed in Mushin's heart as she looked at the approaching 30-plus peak experts. Even her breaths became stifled. She had long since known that mythology wasn't a pushover and that the 5 great super guilds' strength the various superpowers had seen thus far was only the tip of the iceberg. However, she never thought that the reality of the situation would actually be so hopeless and suffocating. Black Flame. Sandstorm grinned smugly as he glared at Shi Feng. You only beat me last time thanks to your mana body. I'll let you know what true strength is this time. If you couldn't do it last time, then I'm afraid you still can't do it this time, Shi Feng retorted, shaking his head as he watched Sandstorm approach. Still acting stubborn even in the face of death? I want to see what other tricks you have up your sleeves this time. After saying so, Sandstorm immediately charged at Shi Feng, his speed as fast as a shooting star. The distance of 100 yards seemed almost non-existent to him. Before Frost Heaven's members could react, Sandstorm was already standing in front of Shi Feng. The dagger he wielded also turned into a phantom snake that bit at Shi Feng's heart. Tricks. Shi Feng shook his head when he saw this scene. He then stretched out his hand. Boom. A violent storm enveloped the entire battlefield, kicking up dust and dirt into the air. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. How is this possible? The next moment, everyone stared at the two figures standing amid the dust cloud in stupefaction. At this time, Sandstorm's dagger hovered half an inch away from Shi Feng's heart. Meanwhile, before anyone realized it, Shi Feng had actually caught Sandstorm by the wrist, intercepting the hand holding the dagger. How is this possible? Sandstorm was stunned when he saw his captured wrist. Chapter 27-25, Warm-up over? How did he do it? That other guy's power is comparable to mythic monsters. Yet Black Flame actually received the attack directly? Black Flame should be under the magic barrier suppression now, right? So this is Black Flame's true strength? After a moment of silence, the audience in the arena instantly broke into an uproar, never having expected things to turn around so quickly. When mythology revealed its frightening combat power, almost everyone believed that this fuss caused by Zero Wing and Frost Heaven was over. Yet it turned out that Zero Wing still had the strength to contend against mythology. How could anyone not entertain expectations in this situation? After all, far too few people in God's domain dared challenge the 5 great super guilds. Regardless of the outcome, after this challenge to mythology in this competition, Black Flame's name would become known to everyone in God's domain. However, unlike the spectating players, the mythology members at the advanced resource node showed no signs of surprise. This was especially true for the 100 players forming the battle array. Sandstorm is too reckless. The vice commander previously warned him that Black Flame isn't a simple opponent, yet he actually charged into battle all by himself without a word. Foolish. He is truly foolish. He actually ignored the vice commander's words. He's going to turn us into a laughing stock for the other superpowers. The 30-plus Void Realm experts from mythology did not feel a shred of pity for Sandstorm, only anger that he had allowed himself to get caught. Their vice commander Prosciutto had gone to great lengths to create a scenario presenting mythology as an existence that should never be provoked. Now, Sandstorm had single-handedly ruined this scenario. Sandstorm, come back. Stop shaming yourself in front of guild leader Black Flame, Prosciutto said, sighing as he looked at Sandstorm and his dumbfounded expression. At Prosciutto's words, Sandstorm snapped out of his daze, and his expression turned unprecedentedly grim and fearful. His hands even started trembling slightly. No, I can't disappoint the vice commander. Die. You must die. Only if you die can I wash away my shame. Sandstorm turned to Shi Feng, a hint of fear and madness in his eyes as he looked at Shi Feng. However, the fear he felt wasn't because of Shi Feng but Prosciutto. Immediately, Shi Feng felt the power resisting his hands strengthening. Before Shi Feng could react, Sandstorm disappeared from where he stood and reappeared in midair with crimson runes covering his body. In addition, Sandstorm's body also underwent several physical changes. Not only did his body enlarge, but 2 black horns also grew out from his forehead. He also gained a pair of pitch-black feathered wings and a scaly tail. The frightening aura he now exuded had Frost Heaven's Tier 3 experts shuddering involuntarily. What did he do? Doesn't the competition venue prevent the use of berserk skills? A hint of fear appeared in Mushin's eyes as she gazed at Sandstorm hovering in midair. Compared to his previous self, the current Sandstorm was like a completely different person. Not only did his aura intensify, but even his life rating had received a significant improvement. No, it's not a berserk skill. He's just reverting to his original form, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. Even he was a little surprised when he saw Sandstorm's transformation. Mythology truly is amazing. To think they actually managed to get their hands on the demi-dragon bloodline. Someone among them even managed to endure the bloodline's violent power. In God's domain, aside from bloodlines that increased a player's life rating, there were special bloodlines that functioned differently. One such example was the violent demi-dragon bloodline, which could raise a player's life rating to the archaic species standard, granting players a much greater improvement than ordinary bloodlines. However, this bloodline had a drawback. Due to the demi-dragon bloodline's overly violent power, Players paid a heavy price to use whenever a player activated their demi-dragon bloodline. They would be subjected to unimaginable pain beyond the tolerance of ordinary humans. Hence, very few people were willing to accept such bloodlines. Shi Feng never thought that Sandstorm would manage to not only assimilate the demi-dragon bloodline but also endure its violent power. You must be crazy. Wuxia was exasperated to see Shi Feng marveling at Sandstorm's strength. The strength of his aura has more than doubled. I even suspect he has already reached the Tier 4 standard in terms of the strength attribute. Yet you still have the time to admire his strength? That's right. In terms of physique and basic attributes, he is indeed on par with bona fide Tier 4 classes. Shi Feng nodded in affirmation. Wuxia couldn't help goggling at Shi Feng's composure. She simply couldn't understand what was going through his mind. It was as if he had forgotten who had driven Sandstorm to such an extent. Lina, you guys go help him as well. Prosciutto ordered calmly to the blonde, female shield warrior beside him. At this command, the mythology members standing around Prosciutto turned to him in surprise. The blonde girl named Lina was Prosciutto's right-hand man. She was a bona fide domain realm expert and her strength ranked within the top 3 in this team of theirs. Now Prosciutto was actually having her join the fight as well. Yes, sir. Lina made a respectful bow before joining Sandstorm together with 5 other players behind her. What's going on? What is Prosciutto thinking? Does he think Sandstorm isn't enough to deal with Black Flame? That's not possible, right? That Sandstorm can be considered a Tier 4 monster already. Maybe the others were told to deal with Frost Heaven's members? At this time, everyone in the audience was eyeing Lina's group curiously. Because of the battle arrays buff, the 6 all possessed strength and defense close to matching mythic monsters. Any of them could easily annihilate a superpower's 1,000-man team. Having 6 of them move together was simply overkill. Isn't Prosciutto overestimating us? Wuxia felt like crying when she saw Lina's group joining the fight. While the fact that Prosciutto had dispatched such a force to deal with them meant that he thought highly of them, she couldn't bring herself to appreciate the gesture. After all, they would have to deal with 4 peak experts with basic attributes close to matching mythic monsters. However, before Wuxia and the other Frost Heaven members could prepare themselves, the aura of Lina's group suddenly changed. In the blink of an eye, 6 more demi-dragons appeared hovering in the air. What is Prosciutto trying to do? Crap. 7 bona fide mythic combatants. I must be dreaming. This is the real power of the 5 great super guilds? The various spectating powers and players gasped involuntarily when they saw the 7 demi-dragons in the air. Bastards. Mythology is really a group of bastards. Mythology's 1,000-man team possessed not only over 30 near-mythic combatants but even 7 bona fide mythic combatants. This situation was simply mind-blowing. While the audience was feeling fearful over the absolute power Mythology displayed, Lina flew toward Shi Feng and stopped near him. Your Excellency Black Flame, we sincerely apologize for Sandstorm's sudden assault on you, Lina said, her golden eyes carrying great respect as she looked at Shi Feng. According to our vice commander's will, let's end the warm-up here and have both sides show our true strength. This is the respect we deserve, right? Sure. You're right. Shi Feng nodded. Shi Feng's words echoed in everyone's mind like a deafening thunder and instantly silenced everyone. What? Warm up? They were just warming up before? I didn't hear things right. That woman actually told Black Flame that they should stop warming up? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. This is a lie. This must be a lie. The spectating powers and players felt their minds growing silly when they heard the exchange between Lina and Shi Feng. Based on Lina's words, Black Flame had still been holding back thus far, and now she was requesting him to fight with his full strength. Meanwhile, Shi Feng agreed to her request. If what Lina said was true, how much weaker were they in combat power compared to Mythology and Black Flame? At this time, Wuxia stared at Shi Feng in disbelief. Shi Feng had previously stopped Sandstorm's attack, which carried power at the near-mythic standard, while under an advanced magic barrier's suppression. Yet he hadn't used his full strength back then. However, before Frost Heaven's members could react, a surge of mana flooded in from the surrounding environment, with Shi Feng as the center. The ground and sky even shook from the sheer volume of power being gathered. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The magic barrier enveloping Frost Heaven's members also began cracking. Less than a second later. Boom. The advanced magic barrier shattered, transforming into countless particles of light and disappearing simultaneously. A mana domain enveloped the entire advanced resource node, causing everyone present to feel an unprecedented fear and oppression. A domain. Is this really a mana domain? Chapter 27-26, Battle of Monsters with Shi Feng as the center. A dark space with a 1,000-yard radius enveloped the advanced resource node and its surroundings. The mana inside the dark space flowed so rapidly that even ordinary players could sense the flux. The feeling of devastation and oppression this dark space gave off made even the audience in the distant spectator stands fearful. How can such a powerful mana domain exist? Even the mana domain of superior mythics isn't this strong. The advanced magic barrier shattered? Shouldn't mana domains be weaker than magic barriers? Many of the major powers spectating from the VIP viewing rooms had knowledge of mana domains. Some of them had even experienced one before. However, compared to what they had seen and experienced, Shi Feng's mana domain was on a completely different level. So this is his mana domain? Muxin, who stood near Shi Feng, was stunned right now. When she looked at Shi Feng again, she felt as if she was seeing him for the first time. She had heard from Frost Heaven's deceased foreign aide that Shi Feng's mana domain was incredibly powerful. However, the mana domain before her was not just powerful but a whole new ball game altogether. Shi Feng's mana domain had essentially created a world of its own, and within this world he controlled everything. In this space, Tier 3 experts were basically ants in front of Shi Feng. Meanwhile, Sandstorm, hovering in midair, was dumbfounded when he saw Shi Feng's astonishing mana domain. A player's mana domain can actually be this strong? Sandstorm's heart roiled with doubts as he felt the strong repulsive force coming from all directions. Shi Feng's mana domain was much stronger than that of superior mythics. Even after transforming into his demi-dragon form and gaining a Tier 4 physique and basic attributes, Sandstorm still suffered a significant restriction in his movements. By his estimates, he had lost around 20% of his basic attributes. His reaction speed and movement speed had also fallen by 30%. Now his overall combat power was barely at the Tier 4 standard. Let's get started then. After glancing at Lina and the other demi-dragons, Shi Feng unsheathed the abyssal blade and vanished. Where did he go? Shi Feng's sudden disappearance confused Frost Heaven's members. He disappeared? At this moment, let alone Frost Heaven's members, even the audience in the spectator stands were stunned. A living human had actually disappeared from their godlike perspective. However, before anyone could react, an explosion suddenly sounded in midair. Boom. The next moment, a black shadow crashed into the ground, the impact creating cracks that extended over 20 yards. The frightening shockwave nearly toppled the nearby Frost Heaven members. What happened? Everyone gaped in shock when they saw the figure on the ground, their eyes wide with disbelief. Without anyone realizing it, Shi Feng had appeared amid the flock of hovering demi-dragons, fresh blood coating his long sword. Meanwhile, the figure on the ground actually belonged to a demi-dragon. At this moment, not only did this demi-dragon's armor sport a bone-deep cut, but 1/8 of his HP had vanished. The speed of Shi Feng's attack was simply unheard of. However, compared to the audience and Frost Heaven members, the mythology members spectating the fight were much more surprised by this situation, especially Sandstorm. A hint of confusion lingered in his eyes as he glared at Shi Feng after transforming into our demi-dragon form. With the combat arrays buff, we wouldn't lose even 3% of our HP after taking a direct hit from a mythic monster. How can Black Flame have such great strength? Fear surfaced in Sandstorm's eyes as he analyzed the situation. As demi-dragons, they could be considered bona fide Tier 4 combatants. Yet even in such a situation they still were no match for Shi Feng. Sandstorm simply couldn't fathom how much strength Shi Feng had. As expected of the demi-dragon bloodline combined with an advanced combat array's assistance, it'll be difficult to finish one of them quickly. When Shi Feng looked at the demi-dragon on the ground, he was slightly surprised. Although he didn't use any skills or spells in his attack, he wielded a fragmented legendary weapon and wore several fragmented legendary items. In terms of the strength attribute, he already rivaled superior mythics of the same level. This was why he could slay Tier 3 players effortlessly. However, despite having such basic attributes, he had only managed to take away 1/8 of the demi-dragon's HP with his normal attack. The defense of the demi-dragon he targeted could rival that of superior mythics. Everyone, don't get entangled with him. His attributes and speed are above ours. All we need to do is deplete his stamina and concentration. Lina commanded calmly and without hesitation. Maintain your distances. Jack, prioritize protecting our healers. He definitely won't last long in a protracted battle. Understood. Lina's command boosted the demi-dragon's fighting spirit, and they promptly went into action. With Lina taking the lead, 5 demi-dragons surrounded and attacked Shi Feng. In addition, 1 demi-dragon oracle stood at the rear, casting defensive spells and buff spells one after another, boosting the other demi-dragon's attributes. No longer having to worry about taking damage, the 5 demi-dragons in the vanguard fought Shi Feng desperately, intending to trade blow for blow. Moreover, the 5 of them had excellent coordination, moving as one. For a time, explosions continually shook the earth and sky. Countless afterimages also danced across the sky. The Tier 3 experts in the spectator stands were stupefied. They couldn't tell what was going on at all. They couldn't even tell which afterimage belonged to whom. They only saw some of the brief clashes at best. Of the spectators watching the fight, only those in the VIP viewing rooms could get a clear picture, thanks to the spectator interface's slow-motion mode. The 5 vanguard demi-dragons perfectly merged their skills, spells and combat techniques. They also had perfect coordination with one another. When one of them exposed a chink in their defense from clashing with Shi Feng, the others would immediately attack, preventing him from landing a fatal blow. As the clash continued, the expressions of Mushin and the other Frost Heaven members also grew darker. Although the two sides seemed evenly matched, Shi Feng had to deal with the 7 demi-dragons' back-and-forth offensive all by himself. He had no time to rest at all. His stamina and concentration consumption were far greater than mythology's 7 demi-dragons. At this rate, Shi Feng would run out of stamina and concentration before Lina and the others did. Black Flame, you will lose for sure this time. While we aren't a match for you by ourselves, how long can you possibly last against our joint assault? Sandstorm grew increasingly excited as the fight went on. Although he had suffered plenty of attacks from Shi Feng and lost a lot of HP, he continuously received healing from the rear-line healers. Hence he quickly recovered the HP he lost. Black Flame, you can't blame us for bullying you with numbers. It's your fault for not having anyone capable of backing you up, the tall man beside Sandstorm said, laughing. At these words, Frost Heaven's members lowered their heads in shame. Against such strength, Tier 3 experts like themselves were nothing but jokes. They wouldn't even qualify to be distractions. After all, they couldn't keep up with these people's speeds. It seems this is Zero Wing's limit. However, it's already plenty amazing that Black Flame managed to last this long. It's a pity there aren't any capable combatants among Frost Heaven's members. Otherwise, they could have put up a fight against mythology. Many of the spectating major powers couldn't help pitying Shi Feng. He clearly possessed inhuman strength that even mythology had to be wary of. Unfortunately, the gap between the 5 great super guilds and the other superpowers was simply too massive. Even if all of Frost Heaven's participants were there right now, they still wouldn't be able to threaten Lina's group of 7. However, this is a valiant defeat for Black Flame. He can actually hold his ground against 7 Tier 4 monsters simultaneously. He deserves his title of Sword King. Sword King? As I see it, he's strong enough to rank within the top 6 of the God's Domain experts list. Only the 5 great super guilds' old monsters can fight him. Many of the Tier 3 experts spectating the fight admired Shi Feng. Those that previously held doubts about his title of Sword King also stopped doubting him. The seconds and minutes flew by. While everyone was feeling unreconciled for Shi Feng, the man himself suddenly leaped backward, distancing himself from the 5 vanguard demi-dragons. Don't even think of escaping us. We have wings. We are by no means slower than you when it comes to flying. Upon seeing Shi Feng pulling away, Sandstorm immediately accelerated, chasing after him. When players gained a mana domain, they became capable of flight. However, flight achieved through this method was significantly slower than flying mounts. In comparison, demi-dragons could fly nearly as fast as flying mounts. Escape. Shaking his head, Shi Feng said, I just thought that time is almost up, so I plan to end this battle. You're still arrogant even in the face of death. I want to see how exactly you're going to end this battle. Sandstorm sped up at Shi Feng's words. Time is almost up? Lina felt that something was amiss when she saw Shi Feng's calm expression. What does he mean? However, before Lina could ponder on the matter, Shi Feng sheathed the abyssal blade. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You said before that I shouldn't blame you for bullying using numbers. I very much agree with this point. Gazing at Sandstorm and the other demi-dragons, Shi Feng unsheathed the other long sword hung by his waist and said, Now you shouldn't blame me either for bullying with numbers. After Shi Feng finished speaking, the twilight blade in his hand suddenly shone brightly, illuminating a radius of several thousand yards. Twilight's shadow. Twilight of the gods. The next moment, 8 physical phantoms split out from Shi Feng's body, every phantom identical to him. Chapter 27:27, Sword Emperor. When the 8 copies of Shi Feng appeared above the battlefield, the audience momentarily fell silent. Doppelgangers. Crap. Something like this is possible. The spectators' hearts were filled with an indescribable sense of shock as they looked at the 9 Shi Fengs in the air. If anyone else had summoned doppelgangers, they wouldn't have thought much of it. However, Shi Feng was someone capable of single-handedly going up against 7 bona fide mythic combatants with Void Realm combat standards. Now that Shi Feng had summoned 8 doppelgangers of himself. Meanwhile, Lina and the other demi-dragons turned pale when they saw the 9 Shi Fengs before them, their hearts plunging to the very bottom of the abyss. They had to give it their all just to deal with 1 Shi Feng. Now that 8 more had appeared, even if these doppelgangers had significantly weaker basic attributes, the demi-dragons would still suffer tremendously. Let's start the second round then, Shi Feng said, a faint smile appearing on his face as he looked at Lina's group. The next moment, Shi Feng's 8 doppelgangers split up and charged at the 7 demi-dragons, their speed hardly any slower than Shi Feng's. It's just a doppelganger. Do you think you can scare me with it? Sandstorm stabbed his dagger at the doppelganger approaching him, the weapon instantly transforming into a dozen shadow snakes. Advanced combat technique. Rampant bites. Seeing the approaching shadow snakes, the doppelganger brandished its sword. 6 extreme slashes. The next moment, 6 sword lights tore through space, shattering the shadow snakes. One of the sword lights even bypassed the shadow snakes and landed on Sandstorm's shoulder. After the sword light passed through, a bone-deep cut appeared on Sandstorm's shoulder. The assassin's body shot backward like a meteor and smashed into the ground. As for his HP, it had fallen by over 1/8 of its total. Aside from Sandstorm, the other demi-dragons were also sent smashing into the ground by Shi Feng's doppelgangers and suffered heavy injuries. They were utterly incapable of resisting the doppelgangers at all, and they could only watch as their HPs continuously decreased. Out of the 7 demi-dragons, only Lina, who had activated a Tier 3 life-saving skill and reduced the damage she sustained by half, was in a better condition. However, as she had to cope with 2 of Shi Feng's doppelgangers, her HP still decreased steadily. It was only a matter of time before she got killed. Those doppelgangers are so strong. Aren't those doppelgangers a little too much? I get the feeling that just one of Black Flame's doppelgangers is more than enough to kill a mythic monster already. The audience in the spectator stands couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Shi Feng's doppelgangers suppressing Lina's group. Everyone present had seen doppelgangers before. However, this was the first time they had seen a player's doppelganger capable of suppressing Tier 4 combatants. No wonder. So, this is why Black Flame is confident in provoking mythology. Unyielding Heart felt endless admiration for Shi Feng when he saw Lina's group getting beaten up. It had been a long time since anyone had dared challenge the 5 great super guilds in the virtual gaming industry. Now, not only did Shi Feng possess the combat power to overwhelm 7 Tier 4 combatants, but it was also almost certain he would be able to capture mythology's advanced resource node. On the battlefield, Lina and the other demi-dragons saw their HPs fall below the critical level. With only 3 or 4 more exchanges, they would fall to Shi Feng's doppelgangers. However, before the battle could continue, several dazzling sword lights struck at the doppelgangers. Boom, boom, boom. Shi Feng's doppelgangers hurriedly defended against the attacks, the collisions resulting in explosions that created massive spatial rifts. Vice Commander? Lina and the others were ecstatic when they saw the origin of the sword lights. The person that just took action was none other than Prosciutto, the vice commander of mythology's trump card legion. However, Prosciutto's appearance had already undergone a drastic change at this time. Runes had appeared all over his pitch-black armor, and complex magic arrays covered his forehead and eyes. He also exuded a majestic aura reminiscent of a demon god. Even Shi Feng's mana domain couldn't suppress him. A bronze combat array? Shi Feng's eyes were blank with surprise as he looked at Prosciutto's transformation. However, he soon shook his head in denial. A bronze combat array shouldn't be something Tier 3 players can activate. Moreover, it's impossible for bronze combat arrays to make an appearance at this stage of the game. Before Shi Feng could analyze the situation in detail, Prosciutto raised the purple greatsword he wielded and instantly appeared before him. The aura he exuded could make even mythic monsters fearful. No. Impossible. Is he really a Tier 3 player? His aura is stronger than even that of superior mythics. Everyone spectating the fight gasped spontaneously at Prosciutto's astonishing transformation. Mushin, who stood on the battlefield, couldn't help staring at Prosciutto in horror and surprise. She couldn't bring herself to believe this was true. Previously, Lena and the others had already displayed monstrous strength. Mushin never imagined that Prosciutto would be even more monstrous. At this time, Prosciutto could no longer be considered a Tier 3 player. He looked more like a dragon wearing human skin. The terrifying aura he exuded caused the Tier 3 experts present to stumble backward, none of them daring to meet his gaze. The only time Mushin had felt such a terrifying aura was when she faced a Tier 4 dragon. Guild leader Black Flame, you have truly surprised me, Prosciutto said as he observed Shi Feng, his voice full of fighting spirit. You are the first person to have forced me to use this form. As a token of my gratitude, I will be your next opponent. As soon as Prosciutto said so, the audience in the spectator stands cheered inwardly. Crap. Are you kidding me? Even Prosciutto intends to take action. A fight between the formidable Prosciutto and Unfathomable Black Flame. This will definitely be the apex fight of God's domain. It's more than just an apex fight. Look how the initial clash between the two already shattered the sky. If the two really fight each other, the entire island might get destroyed. Monsters. These two are real monsters. Just getting the chance to spectate a fight between them is well worth the ticket price. At this time, besides the players on the spectator stands, the various major powers in the VIP viewing rooms were also greatly shocked by Prosciutto's declaration. They immediately had all their members focus their attention on Prosciutto and Shi Feng, as well as record the two's battle. After all, it was normally impossible to collect such information in the outside world. Only in this competition venue would they have the chance to do so. However, after hearing Prosciutto's declaration, Shi Feng abruptly turned away. Are you two not going to come together? Shi Feng asked loudly as he looked at the empty sky. Shi Feng's words confused everyone present. Is he talking to himself? Is there something in the sky? Impossible. My screen isn't showing anything there. Black Flame must have seen wrong. However, before anyone could dismiss their doubts, a deep voice suddenly came from the void and echoed throughout the sky. Amazing. As expected of the person Prosciutto and Cold Shadow are interested in. The next moment, a black shadow gradually appeared in the air. When this black shadow revealed itself, everyone saw that it was a white-cloaked man of indiscernible age. Moreover, despite the man clearly standing in midair, it was as if no one could perceive his existence in their mind. Everyone looking at him ignored his existence automatically. Crap. Isn't he that existence from mythology? Insane. This is insane. Mythology actually let this person join the competition. Is mythology trying to secure the championship? The players in the spectator stands were unfamiliar with this white-cloaked man. On the other hand, a wave of exclamations swept through the VIP viewing rooms when they saw him. After all, this white-cloaked man was one of the terrifying existences in mythology who had reached the higher domain realm. Nobody knew his true age. The only thing others knew was that this man, called Odin, was one of mythology's 3 grand elders. Even mythology's guild leader had to obey his words. Sir, why are you here? Prosciutto put on an indescribably respectful expression the moment he saw the white-cloaked man. It was as if he had just seen a real god. I only came here to deal with some matters, but it seems that won't be possible now, Odin said before glancing at Shi Feng. He then continued calmly, pack up. We're abandoning this advanced resource node. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You were abandoning it? Prosciutto was stunned. But why? This was the perfect chance for him to eliminate Shi Feng. How could he possibly be willing to give up at a time like this? At this moment, let alone Prosciutto, everyone spectating the battle was dumbfounded. Since when was mythology so generous? Because, taking another glance at Shi Feng, Odin chuckled. He is already a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Chapter 27-28, Sword Emperor's Might, a Sword Emperor? Prosciutto was stunned when he heard Odin's words, his eyes doubtful as he looked at Shi Feng. Although some experts in God's domain had already reached level 120, reaching level 120 and getting promoted to Tier 4 were two entirely different matters. Reaching level 120 only meant that a player had met the most basic of requirements for the Tier 4 promotion. According to the various guilds' understanding, players would need to search for their Tier 4 legacy lands after reaching level 120, a truly challenging task. Even the 5 great super guilds would need a lot of time to search for just one legacy land. Not to mention, players would then have to challenge this legacy land to obtain their legacy. Meanwhile, Shi Feng was merely the guild leader of a pseudo-superpower. How could he possibly locate a legacy land faster than the various super guilds? A Tier 4 Sword Emperor? No way. It's only recently that some people have reached level 120, yet he's already gotten promoted to Tier 4 Sword Emperor? This is a lie. This must be a lie. That's a Tier 4 class we are talking about. Even the kings of the various kingdoms fear a Tier 4 existence. How can anyone possibly get promoted to Tier 4 so soon? The spectating players had likewise heard Odin's words, and a wave of commotion immediately spread among them, everyone expressing their doubts about Shi Feng's successful promotion to Tier 4. Although Shi Feng had indeed displayed frightening combat power, they still found it possible for a Tier 3 player to do so. After all, many treasures in God's domain could allow players to become incredibly strong. Lena's group of 7 was a perfect example. However, reaching Tier 4 was a different story. Tier 4 existences were powerhouses publicly acknowledged by the NPCs in God's domain. Take the current Tier 4 NPCs for example. No superpower dare defend Tier 4 NPCs. The 5 great super guilds were no exception. This was because Tier 4 was a taboo that had been deeply engraved in the bones of God's domain's players. Tier 4 NPCs were existences that shouldn't be offended under any circumstances. In fact, the various major powers suspected that even the superpowers Tier 3 experts would have to wait until around level 130 to get promoted to Tier 4. On the battlefield, Mushin stared at Shi Feng in shock and expectation. This is true. When Mushin considered the possibility that Shi Feng was a Tier 4 Sword Emperor, a passionate flame burned in her heart. If Odin's words were true, then Frost Heaven's position on Island number 3 was secured. This also meant that Frost Heaven would have a chance of securing the 6th reserve seat and becoming one of the true giants in God's domain. Simultaneously, however, Mushin also couldn't help feeling dubious. While players like herself were still agonizing over unlocking their mana bodies and thinking about how to search for their legacies after reaching level 120, Shi Feng had already completed all these tasks and even reached Tier 4. No matter how she thought about it, this situation was simply implausible. Are you really a Sword Emperor? Prosciutto couldn't help asking Shi Feng. Although Odin had already spoken, Prosciutto still wished to verify this matter with Shi Feng. Immediately, everyone in the arena focused on Shi Feng, wanting to hear the truth from his mouth. That's right. I am indeed a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Shi Feng nodded. At the same time he glanced reflexively at Odin, his eyes full of surprise. If a player did not register themselves at the Adventurers Association and redeem their Tier 4 class emblem, it should be impossible for others to notice their identity. This was especially true if the player in question had hidden their aura and concealed their identity using special tools. In Shi Feng's opinion, he had concealed his promotion very thoroughly all this time. When he fought earlier, he even limited himself to low-tier skills and spells. He also had the Nightwalker's cape to conceal his life aura. As for his mana domain, that couldn't be used to prove anything. The mana domain's acquisition and strengthening mainly depended on a player's control over mana. The better one's mana control, the stronger the mana domain they could summon. It was unrelated to one's tier at all. Meanwhile, following Shi Feng's acknowledgement, silence spread across the entire arena. At this stage of the game where even Tier 3 players were rare, a Tier 4 player had actually come into existence. It was as if Shi Feng was making a joke of all their efforts. No. That's impossible. I won't acknowledge it. Sandstorm's eyes turned bloodshot as he glared at Shi Feng. How can you possibly have reached Tier 4 already? You must be lying. You're trying to fool us into giving you this resource node without a fight. I won't let you succeed. I will expose you. At this point, Sandstorm had already thoroughly lost his mind. Sandstorm had thought that he had grown a lot stronger since his last defeat at Shi Feng's hands and anticipated that the gap between them had shrunk significantly already. Now he was being told that not only did the gap not shrink in the slightest, but it had even widened instead. In Sandstorm's opinion, Shi Feng was merely the guild leader of a small guild. How could Shi Feng possibly surpass him, who was an elite among elites even in the 5 great super guilds? The next moment, Sandstorm's aura burgeoned in intensity, and the size of his body increased by a large margin. Scales also started growing on his face and body. Now he practically looked like a miniature infant dragon. Flapping his powerful wings, Sandstorm swept up a gale and instantly arrived before Shi Feng. Abandoning his weapon, he swiped a claw at Shi Feng. The instant Sandstorm's claw moved, the space around it shattered. Even the flow of time in the vicinity slowed. The power of his attack approached the standard of mythic-ranked archaic species. Why bother? Shi Feng couldn't help sympathizing with Sandstorm when he saw the latter's frenzied assault. After all, he had once fallen into such despair himself. This was especially true after he saw those geniuses who joined the game much later than he did. However, he had long since moved on from this despair. He realized that all he needed to do was live his life well. What was the point of comparing himself with others? Cool your head first, Shi Feng said, waving his hand. A ripple of mana then spread out from under his feet and instantly enveloped a 500-yard radius. Tier 4 legacy skill, Blade Domain. A magic sword suddenly appeared before Sandstorm, who was only half a yard away from Shi Feng. The magic sword then struck the assassin like a streak of lightning. Bot/Biglar. The next moment an arm flew into the air. In the face of this magic sword, even the sturdy dragon scales were no different from a piece of flimsy paper. Upon seeing his arm flying away, Sandstorm instantly sobered up. He hurriedly activated a Tier 3 defensive skill, increasing his defense by a significant margin and doubling his maximum HP. However, no sooner had Sandstorm used his skill than 7 more magic swords appeared in the air. They then transformed into streaks of light that cut him. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Each/plundered 20% of Sandstorm's HP, the 7 swords instantly robbing the assassin of all his HP. The swords also burned his body into ashes, eliminating him from the arena. The entire process might seem long and arduous, but it had taken only an instant in reality. How is this possible? The audience and the spectator stands gaped in shock at this scene. Their minds even froze momentarily. Sandstorm was a demi-dragon that rivaled Tier 4 archaic species in strength. Previously, he still managed to exchange multiple blows with Shi Feng. Yet now, Shi Feng had instantly executed him without even giving him a chance to resist. Chapter 27-29, Shi Feng and Odin, One Move. The gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 is actually this massive? When the various major powers experts in the VIP viewing rooms saw Shi Feng slay Sandstorm, they gasped involuntarily. Although they had long since known that Tier 4 was the milestone separating the strong from the weak in God's domain, they never expected the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 players to be so massive. Just a moment ago, although Lina and the other demi-dragons were struggling with Shi Feng's attacks, they at least possessed the strength to put up a fight. However, as soon as Shi Feng stopped holding back, that bastard! He was actually toying with us all this time. A tall demi-dragon man cursed as he glared at Shi Feng in anger and frustration. No, that probably isn't the case, Lina said, shaking her head. What do you mean? He wasn't toying with us? The tall man asked strangely. This is only my guess, but, peeking at Shi Feng, Lina continued quietly, he might have been on his guard against Sir Odin since the start of the battle. He was wary of Sir Odin? Realization dawned on the other demi-dragons when they heard Lina's conjecture. Odin was an elusive existence in mythology. If he hadn't taken the initiative to appear, none of them would have noticed his presence. Only after Shi Feng exposed him did Odin reveal himself. The tall man and the others shuddered. If what Lena said really was true, then Shi Feng was much more terrifying than they had thought. Meanwhile, after killing Sandstorm, Shi Feng turned to look at Odin in the distance. From the moment he arrived before the advanced resource node, he had sensed a vague killing intent directed at him. If not for him having reached Tier 4 already and received a qualitative improvement to his physique and concentration, he wouldn't have noticed this killing intent at all. Due to this threat, he had held back his strength. Even when clashing with Lena's group, he refrained from using his full strength. Also, he could respond when the owner of this hidden killing intent took action. However, the moment Sandstorm went crazy and lashed out, Odin had also thoroughly displayed his killing intent. Truthfully, even Shi Feng had to be wary of Odin. In his previous life, everyone had heard of Odin's name. Not only was Odin an invincible existence even among Tier 6 god-ranked experts, but fighting enemies of a higher tier was also commonplace for him. In the past, Odin had fought against a Tier 5 NPC while he was still Tier 4. In the end, their battle had not only ended in a draw but even leveled an entire NPC city. This was despite the gap between Tier 4 and Tier 5 being even greater than the one between Tier 3 and Tier 4. Hence, Shi Feng had no choice but to activate Blade Domain as a precaution. The reason Tier 4 classes were feared by players and recognized as powerhouses in God's domain wasn't just their extraordinary physiques and frightening control over mana. Instead, a larger part was due to the Tier 4 skills and spells they wielded. In God's domain, there was a qualitative difference between Tier 3 and Tier 4 skills. This was because Tier 4 skills mainly relied on mana in the natural world to activate. In comparison, Tier 3 skills relied on the user's mana to activate. Due to this difference, the power levels of the two were worlds apart. With the aid of Tier 4 skills and spells, Shi Feng dared to fight against even true Tier 3 infant dragons, let alone kill a demi-dragon like Sandstorm. However, to Shi Feng's surprise, Odin never actually took action. He only used his killing intent to create an illusion of wanting to take action. Youngsters nowadays really are getting better and better. A smile appeared under Odin's hood. The man then looked at Prosciutto and said, "Let's go." "Yes, sir." Prosciutto no longer hesitated this time. However, when he walked past Shi Feng, he also gave the latter a glance. Although he didn't say anything, the intention his eyes conveyed was obvious. "We will meet again." Afterward, Prosciutto and the rest of Mythology's 1,000-man team left the advanced resource node. They gave up the resource node very decisively and departed for another resource node together with Odin. They left. They left just like that? That Odin actually didn't take action? The audience was stunned by this situation. The originally heaven-defying battle had actually ended in such a manner. Moreover, Mythology's members had given up the fight so decisively. This was completely different from how the 5 great superguilds operated normally. At this moment, even Mushin was taken aback by this situation. "Is this our victory?" Mushin couldn't help asking Shi Feng. Odin's name was synonymous with destruction to the various superpowers. Now that Mythology had mobilized even Odin, she found it truly inconceivable that Mythology would give up just because of one Tier 4 player. After all, while a Tier 4 existence was an invincible enemy for the various superpowers, that might not necessarily be the case for the 5 great superguilds. "I guess so." Shi Feng nodded while looking at Odin's departing figure. Odin's decisiveness had caught even Shi Feng off guard. Initially, Shi Feng had already braced himself to fight for his life. He had even resolved to use some of the trump cards he had kept hidden all this time. However, he now felt as if he had just punched at empty air. "Do we still take control of this resource node?" Mushin asked. "Of course," Shi Feng answered decisively. "We went through great difficulties to win it. I'll have the others set up a perimeter now." Upon hearing Shi Feng's answer, Mushin immediately had her subordinates take up stations around the resource node to prevent others from stealing it. After leaving the resource node, Prosciutto couldn't help turning to Odin in confusion. "Sir Odin, since we surrendered the resource node to Black Flame so easily this time, I'm afraid the other 4 guilds will most likely ridicule us. Some superpowers might even start to make light of us because of this. Are we really not going to do anything?" Prosciutto asked. In Prosciutto's opinion, Even if Shi Feng was a Tier 4 player, their team still had a fighting chance, especially since Odin was present. It wouldn't even be strange if they managed to take down Shi Feng. Yet Odin had unexpectedly given away the resource node without a fight. Now isn't the time to fight, Odin replied, shaking his head. Moreover, we know too little about Zero Wing. It isn't the time to fight? Prosciutto grew even more confused at Odin's words. Why? With mythology's strength, they wouldn't fear fighting the 4 other super guilds, much less Zero Wing. In fact, he was confident mythology could triumph over any of the other 4 guilds. Now they were actually retreating because of Zero Wing. When news of this matter spread, mythology would most likely become the various superpowers' laughing stock. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Take a look at these. Odin did not grow angry over Prosciutto's doubts. Instead, he forwarded a few videos to Prosciutto before saying, "You'll understand the reason once you finish watching them." How is this possible? Prosciutto was stunned when he saw the videos Odin sent him. This was because every one of these videos depicted a battle at the other resource nodes mythology occupied. Moreover, these battles shared a common point. Zero Wing's experts took part in them. All of them lost? Chapter 2730, Unfathomable. Zero Wing. As Prosciutto watched the videos Odin sent him, his heartbeat gradually grew erratic. Even his complexion turned somewhat gloomy. Vice Commander? Lena prompted, a little puzzled by Prosciutto's reaction. However, Prosciutto did not respond to Lena's worry. Instead, his gaze suddenly turned indescribably grim. Impossible. The commander actually failed to take down that girl? Prosciutto's mood fluctuated violently after watching one of the videos. Vice Commander, what happened? Did something happen on the commander's side? How is that possible? Even the 4 other guilds wouldn't dare pick a fight with the commander unless they're tired of living. Prosciutto's strange performance surprised and puzzled Lena and the others. They couldn't understand what had happened to provoke such emotional swings in their vice commander. After seeing Prosciutto's reaction, Odin smiled and said, "Now you know why, right? I have to admit that the new era has truly come. Whenever I see you youngsters, I can't help but feel that I really have grown old." Odin's words confused Lena and the others even more. However, as if triggered by these words, a hint of excitement flashed in Prosciutto's eyes. "I see. Thank you for your teaching, sir. I will take this as a warning," Prosciutto said sincerely. "Good. Now this is the little fellow I used to fancy." Odin nodded in satisfaction. "Mythology will have to rely on your bunch in the future." "Sir Odin, what exactly happened?" Lena asked Odin nervously. Initially, with her status, she shouldn't be questioning Odin at all. However, after seeing Prosciutto's transformation, she couldn't help her curiosity. "It's nothing. We simply had 4 of our other resource nodes snatched away," Odin said, chuckling. 4 other resource nodes were taken? How is this possible? Lena gaped in shock, unable to get her mind around it. Who is so bold to actually do this? Is it the 4 other guilds? Besides Lena, the peak experts of mythology standing nearby were also stunned by Odin's words, their eyes full of disbelief. Their giving away 1 resource node was already plenty unbelievable. Now they were hearing that 4 more of the guild's resource nodes had been taken. This sounded more like fiction than reality. "You guys have a look too." Seeing the doubtful gazes focused on him, Odin laughed and passed the information to everyone. The information Odin sent consisted of 4 videos showing the battles that took place in the 4 other resource nodes. Moreover, these had occurred when their team was fighting Black Flame. In the first battle video, the person leading the assault on the resource node was Gentle Snow, the woman the various superpowers were currently fearful of. She single-handedly slew over 200 mythology members with just 3 attacks. The 20-plus peak experts didn't even last 1 move against her. They all died in the spatial storm she created. Aside from peak experts, there were also 3 domain realm elders defending the resource node. One of the 3 had even reached the domain realm's upper stage. Yet even after all 3 of them activated their demi-dragon bloodlines, they actually failed to last more than 10 moves against Gentle Snow. 10 moves. In front of Gentle Snow, the 3 elders' fierce and enigmatic attacks were jokes. Not only did the woman easily unravel their attacks, but she even turned their attacks against them. She used the combination skill the 3 elders executed to instantly obliterate the elder that had reached the domain realm's upper stage. In this battle, Mythology had lost over 400 experts. If not for Gentle Snow refraining from pursuing the fleeing members, the guild's losses would have been even worse. In the second battle video, the person leading the attack was Fire Dance. Although Fire Dance did not possess Gentle Snow's monstrous techniques, her basic attributes were not the slightest bit inferior to those of Tier 4 existences. In addition, her speed was simply godlike. From start to end, not one peak expert managed to touch her. The peak experts could only watch as Fire Dance inflicted cut after cut after cut on their armor, continuously plundering their HPs until nothing remained. Of the defending team at the second resource node, only the Lightning Hammer Vice Commander Howard Was, who was the core of the team, could keep up with Fire Dance's speed. In fact, the two of them were evenly matched, neither able to get the better of the other. However, Alluring Summer was in Zero Wing's team. With her full strength, she cast a Tier 3 super spell on him. This left Howard Was with no choice but to defend. Otherwise, the super spell would level the resource node itself. During the brief moment Howard revealed a gap in his defense, Fire Dance seized the opportunity to land a heavy blow, breaking one of his arms. Hence, Howard's combat power plummeted. Subsequently, Zhao Yueru triple cast 3 Tier 3 curses on him, finishing him off. With Howard's death, Zero Wing and Frost Heaven's team, which was originally at a disadvantage, immediately gained the upper hand and eventually captured the resource node. Meanwhile, the battle in the third resource node was even more astonishing. Lena and the others nearly went crazy upon watching it. After all, the third resource node's defender was none other than the divine spear demon Rex, the commander of Mythology's trump card Legion. Rex was a legendary individual in Mythology and someone Vice Commander Prosciutto had never once beaten. Yet, in the third video, Rex was actually evenly matched with a girl. Although this girl's basic attributes were only nearing the Tier 4 standard, her control over mana was superb. Wielding 300+ magic blades, she prevented Rex from gaining the upper hand. In fact, the girl even slaughtered many experts from Mythology during their clash. Afterward, Rex grew thoroughly enraged and used the combat array he kept in reserve to try to land a fatal blow on Violet Cloud. However, before this hit could land, a tall man carrying a massive shield blocked it. Subsequently, the battle continued for quite some time. Relying on her nimble movements, Violet Cloud always managed to duck behind Cola's protection at critical moments. While Cola bore the brunt of Rex's attacks, she would also instantly heal Cola back to full HP. The duo's combination turned them into undying zombies, and they held out until Rex's combat array expired. Although both sides suffered equally heavy losses after the long battle, as Rex no longer had the combat array's support, he was utterly powerless to do anything about Violet Cloud. To make matters worse, as Zero Wings and Frost Heaven's numbers dwindled, their members became more difficult to kill. In contrast, the rate at which Mythology's members got killed only increased as the battle continued. Eventually, in order to avoid the other guilds taking advantage of Mythology, Rex had no choice but to abandon the resource node to conserve his team's stamina and concentration. While the outcome could be said to be a draw since Mythology gave up the resource node, the overall result was still a loss. We lost 3 resource nodes just like that? Lena protested in denial after watching the 3 videos. After calming down though, she said hurriedly, "Even so, there's no reason to let Zero Wing off the hook." While Zero Wing had indeed displayed astonishing combat power, Mythology could easily reclaim its lost resource nodes after reorganizing its forces. After all, they already knew what Zero Wing was capable of. It would be much easier to counter Zero Wing's forces afterward. Impossible. You'll know once you take a look at the 4th video, Prosciutto said. The 4th video? Lena was puzzled. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What relation did the 4th video have with their not being able to deal with Zero Wing? Even if Black Flame was a Tier 4 Sword Emperor, Mythology still had the means to deal with him. Even if Zero Wing had 1 or 2 more powerful combatants, it still wouldn't be a match for Mythology. However, Lena still listened to Prosciutto and played the 4th video. What's going on? Why isn't there anything here? Lena asked when she saw only an empty plane in the video. That's right. There is nothing at all. Prosciutto nodded. He then added slowly, because that place was thoroughly flattened. Chapter 2731, mind-blowing. Although Prosciutto's voice was plain, every word he said thundered in everyone's mind. Flattened? Lena examined the image in the video again. A moment later, her heart began racing and her breathing became stifled. Aside from sand, there was nothing else within the 1,000-yard radius displayed in the video. However, after careful inspection, she noticed piles and piles of fallen trees stacked outside the 1,000-yard radius. Many of these trees were uprooted and most of them had shattered into dozens of pieces. The video then zoomed out and she found that the so-called sandy area actually lay within a large forest. It looked as if something had thoroughly smoothed out the area. "How is this possible?" a Tier 3 Great Mage at the Void Realm exclaimed. "That sandy area doesn't have any mana." At this Great Mage's reminder, Lena and the others also came to this realization and gasped. They had forgotten that the so-called battle video was actually a type of recording magic in God's domain. It could perfectly record the battlefield situation, which included the ambient mana. This allowed players to analyze the battle situation accurately. Meanwhile, they had watched this battle video as if they were watching a video in the real world. They had completely neglected the presence of mana or lack thereof. "Is this Zero Wings doing as well?" Lena asked when she saw the wasteland in the middle of the forest. The wasteland had a 1,000-yard radius. Moreover, the attack used had thoroughly consumed all mana in the area. Even Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells would have difficulty accomplishing such a feat, not to mention, the only Tier 4 player known to exist was Black Flame. Yes. Someone from Zero Wing did it. According to subsequent reports, that person should be Aqua Rose, one of Zero Wing's Vice Guild leaders. "Her specific strength is still a mystery," Odin said, nodding. "However, based on the spell scale, we can think of her as a Tier 4 Great Wizard who wields Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Her destructive power is roughly 10 times that of Black Flame." "How is this possible? Isn't Zero Wing just an up-and-coming pseudo-superpower?" After hearing Odin's simple analysis, Mythology's members fell silent for a long time. They couldn't help doubting the veracity of the reports. Not only did Zero Wing have a Tier 4 Great Wizard, but this Great Wizard even possessed Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. If this was the case, then this matter was much more serious than they imagined. After all, a Great Wizard wielding large-scale destruction spells could easily destroy even major NPC cities. At this stage of the game, such an existence would be invincible, be it in offensive or defensive battles. Meanwhile, in this competition, it wouldn't matter to a Great Wizard how many players were fortifying a resource node. All it would take was one Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell to end everything. And if one wasn't enough, then a second one would do. But, are we really going to just give up? Lena asked. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds. It was sheer humiliation for the guild to get provoked on such a stage. If Mythology didn't do something, the whole world would start to look down on it. Of course not. Odin suddenly smiled. "We must settle this account one way or another, but now isn't the time for that yet. Instead, we should learn from Miracle's example." "Learn from Miracle?" Lena parroted, confused. Beak Taz M/BB avert/being Miracle was merely a slightly above-average superpower. What could Mythology possibly learn from it? Sir Odin is right. "We have to learn Miracle's way of doing things," Prosciutto said with brightened eyes. "We have to publicize this matter so that all the guilds will know about it. Zero Wing might be able to help Frost Heaven secure the 6th seat this time, but what they don't know is that the real doomsday will come after they secure the seat. The reserve seats of God's domain's 12 great guilds were meant for the capable. If a guild relied on the strength of only a handful of individuals to secure one of these seats, then only destruction would await this guild. Moreover, after this competition, Zero Wing would also debut on the international stage. A guild capable of using Mythology as a stepping stone wasn't a problem for only Mythology. The other 4 of the 5 great super guilds couldn't afford to ignore Zero Wing either. Hence, the 5 great super guilds would not allow such an existence to exist in this world. "Good. I will leave this matter for you to handle." Odin nodded in satisfaction when he saw Prosciutto realizing what had to be done. He then vanished from the group as if he had never been there. Shortly afterward, every participating guild in the competition received an astonishing piece of news. Zero Wing had defeated Mythology and stolen 5 of Mythology's resource nodes. The battle videos at the 5 resource nodes even spread to the various superpowers. The sight of Black Flame killing Sandstorm in one move, Gentle Snow killing over 30 Tier 3 peak experts in one move, Aqua Rose flattening a resource node with one spell, Violet Cloud forcing the Divine Spear Demon into retreating, and a handful of Zero Wings members killing the Lightning Hammer were thoroughly etched into everyone's mind. After all these accomplishments, Frost Heaven became the biggest dark horse in this competition. The mind-blowing news shook the various participating guilds in the arena. This is fake. This must be fake. Didn't Zero Wings and Frost Heaven's members launch an attack on mythology only recently? How can the battles be over already? A Tier 4 Great Wizard. How is this possible? The various participating guilds were dumbfounded by the information they received. None of them could accept it. However, it was also impossible for these battle videos to be fake, especially with the frightening strength mythology displayed. The superpowers despaired at the gap between them. Nevertheless, despite having such overwhelming strength, mythology still ended up defeated. Moreover, it didn't even lose at the hands of a super guild but to Zero Wing, an up-and-coming pseudo-superpower. Didn't they say Zero Wing doesn't have any background? What exactly is Zero Wing? For a time, the various superpowers were filled with curiosity and confusion about Zero Wing. Despite being a small guild with no backing, Zero Wing had produced a Tier 4 Sword Emperor and a suspected Tier 4 Great Wizard. How could they bring themselves to believe this? As for the players in the spectator stands, they too were stunned by this situation. They never thought that during the time Shi Feng was fighting one of mythology's teams, astonishing battles had taken place elsewhere as well. They also regretted missing these battles. After witnessing Zero Wing's strength, both the Star Alliances and Unyielding Souls upper echelons couldn't help lamenting this situation. They never thought that after not meeting Zero Wing for some time, the other guild had actually grown to such an extent already. Therefore, this is real power. A passionate flame burned in Purple Eye's heart as she watched the clash between Shi Feng and Sandstorm. So long as I reach Tier 4, the guild will be able to tread the international stage as well. At this time, Purple Eye wasn't the only person to have such thoughts. The various major powers experts in the other VIP viewing rooms also burned with desire and ambition toward attaining Tier 4. Every one of them resolved themselves to do everything they could to reach Tier 4 after this competition. Unlike the audience's excited reactions, Miracle and Sacred Temple were filled with both hatred and shock at Zero Wing's performance. Initially, the two guilds believed the 6th reserve seat was already within their grasp. Now that a powerful competitor had emerged in the competition, the two guilds had no choice but to compete for more resource nodes. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to maintain their current advantage until the end of the competition. Meanwhile, when Seven Wonders received news of Zero Wing's performance, he felt an unprecedented joy and excitement. He truly had not expected the helpers Hong Xinyuan recruited to be powerful enough to pull Frost Heaven out of its hopeless situation and give it a chance to win a reserve seat. To ensure Frost Heaven secured the 6th reserve seat, after Frost Heaven became one of the top 5 ranking guilds on island number 17, Seven Wonders led a team to other islands to compete for more resource nodes. For a time, Miracle, Sacred Temple, and Frost Heaven frantically fought all over the arena. Despite suffering immense casualties, the three guilds continued fighting until the bell signaling the end of the competition rang. Meanwhile, after the competition ended, huge holographic screens appeared on top of every island, the screens listing the total points accumulated by the participating guilds one after another. Mythology, 12,610 points. Pantheon, 3,920 points. Sky Dragon Family, 4,550 points. Netherworld Empire, 13,350 points. Miracle, 5,230 points. Sacred Temple, 5,180 points. As the names of the participating guilds appeared one after another, Frost Heaven's members grew increasingly nervous. The point difference between Miracle, Sacred Temple, and Frost Heaven should be incredibly narrow. In fact, partway through the competition, Shi Feng even had to attack other resource nodes personally and let Frost Heaven's members wear the resource emblem to keep Frost Heaven in the competition. Although there were instances where other guilds had successfully stolen some of Frost Heaven's poorly defended resource nodes, most of these nodes were quickly reclaimed. In addition, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose also wandered between the various resource nodes to avert the ambushes of other guilds. We must succeed. Mushin also grew incredibly nervous as she looked at the screen. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Frost Heaven had suffered tremendous losses during this competition. By the end of the competition, Frost Heaven had fewer than 2,000 members left standing. 6 elders, 2 grand elders and great elder Brilliant Blue had even fallen in battle. This was a massive blow to the guild. At this time, even Shi Feng couldn't remain perfectly calm. He never expected that Miracle and Sacred Temple would secretly ally with other guilds to attack Frost Heaven's resource nodes, forcing him to rotate continuously between several islands. He had even had Aqua Rose obliterate 11 resource nodes. Only then did they manage to deter the other guilds from stealing Frost Heaven's resource nodes. Now that Zero Wing had exhausted its trump cards and revealed many things to the various superpowers, if Frost Heaven still failed to secure the 6th seat in this competition, then Zero Wing would have a thorny road ahead of the next moment. After more than 20 guilds were listed on the screen, Frost Heaven's name finally appeared. Frost Heaven, 5,260 points. Chapter 2732. True Beginning, we won. We really won. Mushin and the other Frost Heaven members were ecstatic when they saw their guild's score. Many members even screamed in joy as they reveled in this moment of victory. What a close one. Shi Feng couldn't help a sigh of relief. In the end, Frost Heaven had beaten Miracle by only 30 points, which was just 1 hour's worth of points for an advanced resource node. If not for some of the other guilds giving up on competing for Frost Heaven's resource nodes, Miracle might have won the 6th seat instead. Shi Feng had to admit that Miracle's foundations were much stronger than many super guilds. Fortunately, everything went according to plan. Now that Frost Heaven has secured the 6th seat, we won't have to worry about getting slots to enter the upper zone. We'll also gain the privilege of garrisoning a city in a kingdom. When Shi Feng saw the guilds listed on the screen being reorganized based on their points and Frost Heaven officially ranking 6th, he began considering the next step of his plans. In his previous life, the arrival of the first major update had brought about a complete change in God's Domain's power structure. Because of the NPC Forces addition, the superpowers competitors were no longer limited to just the major powers. The NPC Forces also became huge competitors. These NPC forces were no ordinary organizations. Before God's Domain underwent its first major update, the NPC population in God's Domain had been minuscule. However, after the major update, the NPC population would increase crazily. Along with the increase in NPC population, the NPC forces normally only mentioned in books or conversations between NPCs would make their debut in the game. In fact, in a few more days, the various major powers would discover a frightening matter. Despite how massive God's Domain's player population was, players made up only a small minority of God's Domain's inhabitants. Yes. Despite the game's current player population being over 10 billion, players were only a minority in the world of God's Domain. Beat/beat in the future, any random kingdom would easily have over 2 billion NPCs. The current player population could, at best, match the total NPC population in 5 or 6 kingdoms, which was roughly equivalent to the standard of one empire. However, God's Domain's players were scattered across the various kingdoms and empires on the 2 main continents. There were also a large number of players in the many other worlds. Hence, in the future the native powers would become the strongest forces in the various kingdoms and empires. Moreover, after this major update, a severe problem would pop up: the disappearance of the protection mechanism for players. At this point, most players weren't even aware of this protection mechanism's existence. This was because this so-called protection mechanism only prevented NPCs from actively targeting players. Hence, most players wouldn't notice its existence and true purpose. They merely took its benefits for granted. However, all of this would change in the world of God's Domain in the future. So long as players left the city, they would no longer enjoy this protection mechanism. What did this mean? Ordinary players would most likely have a difficult time imagining the consequences of such a change. However, this would be a disaster for the growing guilds of God's Domain. This was because NPCs would become capable of taking the initiative to attack players. Highway robbery, launching ambushes when players were killing monsters, killing players because of a random mood swing. Such incidents would become normal occurrences in the future. In fact, Shi Feng himself had been robbed by Tier 4 NPCs on numerous occasions in his previous life. Of course, Powerful NPCs wouldn't rob just anyone they saw. They would focus on stealing incredibly valuable items. Ordinary items would hardly arouse the interest of these powerful NPCs. This change in the game was highly unfavorable for Shi Feng. After all, he carried too many valuable items. As he had the game's rules protecting him before, he hadn't worried about NPCs attacking him. Now that the rules had changed, he had no choice but to act carefully. However, this still wasn't the critical point of the major update. Instead, the fatal change caused by this update was in the management of guild towns and cities. During the early phases of the major update, most players still hadn't noticed a problem with the NPC forces. However, once the local NPC forces finished conducting a thorough investigation on players, they would begin attacking guild towns. If a guild town lacked sufficient combatants to defend it, the territory might very well end up getting taken. This was also one of the main reasons why many superpowers had disbanded after God's Domain underwent its first major update in the past. Meanwhile, the situation now was even worse than during Shi Feng's previous life. In the past, when the first major update hit, the various superpowers already had Tier 4 players defending its territories. However, in this life, let alone Tier 4 players, the superpowers didn't even have many Tier 3 players under their command. It would become a nightmare for the superpowers to defend their guild towns against the various NPC forces. At this point, Shi Feng could already foresee many powers crumbling due to these changes. Compared to his previous life, the first major update's aftermath in this life would definitely be a much more painful sight. Once we get the guild privileges, we'll be able to garrison an NPC city and apply for a guild town teleportation permit. Then Zero Wing could instantly become a giant in God's Domain during the poaching wars. When Shi Feng thought about the imminent poaching wars, he couldn't help feeling a little excited. In the past, some first-rate guilds had eventually grown into super guilds precisely because they managed to take advantage of the poaching wars. In the early stages of God's Domain, the superpowers had a massive advantage in numbers over the major powers. By the time players had reached level 100, the major powers had mostly divided the available player population among themselves already. Hence, even some of the stronger guilds among the major powers had found it incredibly difficult to grow further. This was because after the average level of players reached level 100, guilds that wished to grow needed sufficient numbers. This was especially true when it came to Tier 3 players. Without sufficient Tier 3 players, effectively defending guild towns against NPC forces and monster armies would become impossible. Meanwhile, most players mainly looked at the number of guild towns a guild possessed and the prosperity of these towns when determining a guild's strength. This was also why the War God's Temple had set the number of guild towns owned as a participation requirement for the reserve seat competition. And if a guild wished to maintain many guild towns simultaneously, a lot of manpower was necessary. Now, although Zero Wing already possessed more members than most first-rate guilds, it was still far from comparable to the various superpowers. Meanwhile, after the Great Collapse, the members of the fallen powers would become independent players. So long as Zero Wing took advantage of this opportunity, it could instantly become a bona fide superpower. Moreover, Shi Feng was confident that once Zero Wing had a sufficient player base, the guild could go up against Starlink, Saint's Hand, and even the 5 great super guilds. At the very least, Zero Wing wouldn't be forced to hole up in just a handful of guild towns and cities in an incredibly passive state. In fact, with Zero Wing's current state, it was only a matter of time before the guild crumbled. After all, what allowed the various superpowers to triumph over others were the talents they cultivated. With the resources the superpowers provided, these talents would slowly grow into powerhouses in the virtual gaming industry over time. If Zero Wing did not make sufficient preparations with the guild's current scale and talent count, the guild would be fortunate to keep itself alive in the future. Meanwhile, along with the release of the official rankings, the spectating players and major powers erupted in an uproar. Crap. Frost Heaven actually got a seat. Frost Heaven really is lucky. It actually found a dark horse like Zero Wing. With this, Frost Heaven really is going to rise to prominence. Zero Wing, is it? While the spectating players and major powers found Frost Heaven's victory surprising, they didn't feel particularly surprised by it either. After all, the Tier 4 combatants Zero Wing possessed were simply too terrifying. They were not opponents Tier 3 players could hope to contend with. The major powers paid more attention to Zero Wing than to Frost Heaven. Frost Heaven can consider themselves lucky. After looking at the guild rankings, Cold Shadow glanced at Shi Feng's information and sneered. However, Zero Wing won't be as lucky afterward. The nail that sticks out gets hammered. This held especially true for a prominent guild like Zero Wing. The various superpowers were greatly limited in the forces they could bring out during this competition. This was especially true for the 5 great super guilds. After all, Tier 3 was the minimum standard for players to participate in the competition. However, there was no such restriction in the outside world. The fact that Zero Wing had revealed 2 Tier 4 players in this competition had provoked the various superpowers intense envy. Zero Wing was merely a pseudo-superpower, yet it had actually produced 2 Tier 4 players. If someone were to say that there wasn't a secret behind this achievement, nobody would believe them. After this competition, she could easily foresee that both ordinary powers and superpowers would hound Zero Wing until the guild gave up its secret to completing the Tier 4 promotion. Otherwise, only death would await Zero Wing. As the various superpowers began to plot against Zero Wing, Shi Feng remained wholly unaware of the matter. After the War God's Temple announced the winners for the 6 reserve seats and awarded Zero Wing with a War God's Temple official guild certificate, Shi Feng promptly disbanded his team and bid goodbye to Muxin. He did not stay behind to take part in Frost Heaven's celebration banquet but quietly left the Fire Dragon Empire instead. This caused 7 Wonders and Hong Xinyuan to lament the missed opportunity to thank Shi Feng properly. Black Flame really is an unfathomable person. After watching Shi Feng's figure disappear into the distance, 7 Wonders turned to Muxin and said earnestly, "Muxin, you'll be the first vice guild leader from now on. You'll be responsible for the matter regarding the upper zone slots, S-rank nutrient fluids, and subsequent affairs relating to our alliance with Zero Wing. I believe you can handle them well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You guild leader, please rest assured. I will definitely handle them well," Muxin answered ecstatically. Meanwhile, after Shi Feng left the War God's Temple, he did not hurry to return to Zero Wing's residence to preside over the changing situation. Instead, he made his way to the Twin Towers Kingdom, a dilapidated country on the brink of destruction, which would also become one of the most brilliant kingdoms in the future. Twin Towers City Hall. "Sir, how may I be of service?" a level 180 Tier 3 male administrator asked when he saw Shi Feng enter the building. "If you wish to purchase land, I will have to apologize in advance. We are no longer selling land to the public." "No, I'm not here to purchase land," Shi Feng said, shaking his head. He then took out the official guild certificate from the War God's Temple and said, "I am Zero Wing's guild leader. My guild wishes to officially garrison this city. May I know if that's possible?" Chapter 2733, Garrisoning Twin Towers. Vico, the level 180 Tier 3 male administrator, looked at the certificate in Shi Feng's hand and carefully inspected it. "Yes, this is indeed an official guild certificate from the War God's Temple." Vico nodded, his gaze turning respectful as he looked at Shi Feng. He then added slowly, "Lord Guild Leader, there is nothing wrong with your guild certificate. However, I'm afraid that as an ordinary guild, your guild does not qualify to garrison our kingdom's capital. You can only choose to garrison another of the Twin Towers Kingdom's cities." Sure enough, the guild still can't garrison the capital city. Shi Feng was not particularly surprised by Vico's rejection. Since that's the case, Zero Wing will garrison Sky Spring City. Although the War God's Temple now recognized Zero Wing as an official guild in God's domain, that was only recognition and nothing more. Initially, Shi Feng thought that with the deterioration of the Twin Towers Kingdom due to the abyssal monsters, Zero Wing might have a chance to garrison its capital. However, it would seem that he had still underestimated the Twin Towers Kingdom. After thinking it through, though, he found this situation reasonable. In his previous life, the Twin Towers Kingdom had shone brightly on the continent of God's domain, thanks to the Tower of Time and secret Covenant Tower it housed. It had been a kingdom that stood far above other kingdoms. Moreover, while the Twin Towers Kingdom might currently look battered, now that the first major update had taken place, NPCs would start appearing in large numbers across the kingdom. Once that happened, it was only a matter of time before the NPCs turned the tables on the abyssal monsters. Otherwise, Shi Feng wouldn't have rushed to have Zero Wing garrison the Twin Towers Kingdom. "That won't be a problem. Please follow me. I will conduct the procedures for you," Vico said and led Shi Feng to the third floor hall. On his way to the third floor, Shi Feng noticed that the number of NPCs inside the city hall had increased significantly. Previously, it was rare to see even one Tier 3 NPC in a city hall. Now he spotted at least a dozen. Moreover, even the weakest of them was at level 140 while the strongest reached level 182. They were not existences current Tier 3 players could hope to contend against. Through this, he could already anticipate a large batch of Tier 3 NPCs appearing inside the Twin Towers Kingdom in the near future. With the combat power of these NPCs, retaking the Twin Towers Kingdom and driving the abyssal monsters back into the abyss would be entirely possible. Meanwhile, the Sky Spring City he chose to have zero-wing garrison was the closest NPC city to the Secret Covenant Tower. Although Sky Spring City didn't even rank within the top 15 of the Twin Towers Kingdom's NPC cities, after the first major update, the Secret Covenant Tower would become more attractive than the Tower of Time. This was because the Secret Covenant Tower was a holy land for grinding for levels and acquiring guild resources. Before God's Domain's first major update took place, grinding for levels was a daily chore for players. However, after the first major update, grinding for levels would become deadly. If players did not possess overwhelming strength, then the moment they left the confines of NPC cities, they would have to fight with their lives on the line. This was because both NPCs and monsters gained conscious thought after the major update, and they would no longer let players kill them like idiots. Both NPCs and monsters would fight desperately for survival. Hence, grinding monsters would no longer be simple, repetitive fights for EXP. Instead, it would become a fight where players bet their lives for EXP. In a situation where the two sides were roughly equal in strength, every fight would be incredibly taxing. In fact, after the major update, most players would no longer dare fight monsters that were significantly higher leveled than they were. Of course, the increased difficulty in killing monsters came in tandem with a drastic increase in the EXP monsters awarded, at least 10 times more than what they previously awarded. Even so, leveling up would still become an increasingly laborious task in the future. However, it was a different story in the Secret Covenant Tower. The countless monsters trapped in the Secret Covenant Tower's special space had already gone crazy and did not possess any consciousness or intelligence. The only thing on their minds was slaughter. Yet, despite the lack of intelligence, the monsters inside granted the same amount of EXP as the monsters in the outside world. The only problem was that entering the Secret Covenant Tower cost magic crystals. In addition, the monsters inside did not drop coins or magic crystals. The value of the materials they dropped was also negligible. Fortunately, the Secret Covenant Tower wasn't completely barren of loot. Hidden inside the special space were relics belonging to ancient civilizations. The deeper one progressed down the tower, the better the relics one could obtain. Examples would be weapon and equipment designs, master-ranked potion recipes, and even complete legacies for Tier 3 classes. Yes, complete legacies for Tier 3 classes. Unlike the Tier 3 legacies scattered in the outside world, a complete legacy could lower the difficulty of players' Tier 3 promotion by a large margin. A complete Tier 3 legacy could allow a guild to gain a large number of Tier 3 players within a short period. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that, for guilds, a complete Tier 3 legacy was 100 times more valuable than a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, complete Tier 3 legacies only started appearing from the 18th floor. This was a place that became available after the first major update. Before this, the Secret Covenant Tower was only a place for pre-level 100 players to grind for levels. It wasn't suitable for players past level 100. However, after the first major update, the Secret Covenant Tower would no longer be the same as before. In the past, after it was revealed that the Secret Covenant Tower dropped complete Tier 3 legacies, the various powers on the eastern continent had swarmed to the Twin Towers Kingdom. This, in turn, had made the Twin Towers Kingdom one of the most dazzling kingdoms in God's domain, and Sky Spring City had also become an NPC main city that was second only to the capital city. Shortly afterward, Administrator Vico completed all the formalities needed for Zero Wing to garrison Sky Spring City. Lord Guild Leader, this is your Sky Spring City Guild token. Vico handed a golden token to Shi Feng. He then explained, this token grants you partial authority to manage Sky Spring City, including its security and development. Once Zero Wing garrisons Sky Spring City, it will receive 10% of the city's profits as maintenance and management fees. No problem. Zero Wing will manage Sky Spring City well and turn it into the best city in the Twin Towers Kingdom, Shi Feng said, nodding. Once a guild garrisoned a city, it couldn't arbitrarily decide to abandon the city and seek greener pastures. One could say that the guild and city were bound together for good or ill. Thus, even after guilds obtained the qualifications to garrison an NPC city, they still had to be careful with their choice. Fortunately, Shi Feng didn't have to concern himself with such a problem. Sky Spring City was bound to become one of the important hubs in the eastern continent. The money and resources it could rake in would far surpass those of many royal capitals. If developed properly, the city could even rival imperial capitals. I pray that you can fulfill this wonderful goal, my lord, Vico said, feeling slightly surprised by Shi Feng's confidence. Now that Zero Wing has officially garrisoned Sky Spring City, can we enable Sky Spring City's city teleportation network? Shi Feng asked. Obtaining the resources Sky Spring City had to offer was only one of his goals in having Zero Wing garrison the city. What was more important for Zero Wing was the city teleportation network that came with garrisoning a city. This was also the main reason the various superpowers had frantically fought to secure a reserve seat. Certainly. However, your guild will have to handle the cost of binding with Sky Spring City's teleportation magic array, Vico said with a hint of joy in his voice. How much will it cost to construct one large-scale teleportation array? Shi Feng asked. If it is only one, the material fee is 100,000 gold coins and 30,000 magic crystals. The labor cost is an additional 5,000 gold, Vico said. In total, it will cost 105,000 gold and 30,000 magic crystals. You guys sure are ruthless. It's just a bunch of ordinary materials, yet you're actually charging me 100,000 gold. Shi Feng was flabbergasted at Vico's quote. If it were before, he might have accepted this price as normal. However, after gaining experience in constructing teleportation arrays, he knew that the materials needed were much cheaper than what Vico quoted him. At most, the material cost should total around several thousand gold. No. The materials the Twin Towers Kingdom uses are the best. No problems will occur even after 1,000 years of use, Vico assured sincerely while shaking his head. Fine, so be it. However, I want everything done within 2 hours, Shi Feng said after taking a look at the time. It had been nearly a day since the first major update took place. Meanwhile, the first wave of the NPC population boom would occur on the second day after the first major update. This was also the moment darkness would befall the various powers. That won't be a problem, Vico said confidently. May I know which guild city you wish to construct the teleportation array in? Silverwing City. Shi Feng answered after giving the question some thought. Silverwing City was pivotal to Zero Wing's future development and resistance against Saint's Hand. Hence, it was imperative that Silverwing City developed as rapidly as possible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although it is slightly far, so long as my lord makes the full payment, we will act immediately, Vico said, gritting his teeth as he looked at the map. To Vico's joy, Shi Feng paid the 105,000 gold and 30,000 magic crystals without hesitation. After receiving the coins and magic crystals, the NPC promptly left the private lounge, evidently making his way to Silverwing City. Next, I'll have to see how much the NPC population will increase during the initial wave. Shi Feng's gaze grew solemn after Vico left the room. Hopefully the number isn't too significant. Although he had managed to execute his plan in time, its success still depended heavily on how much the NPC population grew after the first population boom. If the increase in NPC count was too severe, even Zero Wing would be overwhelmed. After all, the guild simply had too few Tier 3 combatants right now. Meanwhile, Tier 3 combatants were the minimum requirement for maintaining public order in guild towns. At 6 a.m., the sun slowly rose into the sky and shone its dazzling rays onto the various cities of God's domain, symbolizing a new day in God's domain. Chapter 2734, New World begins. Typhoon Empire, Typhoon City. The morning sun's rays shone on the secret pavilion's residence. However, nobody in the residence's scorching atmosphere was in the mood to enjoy this cool morning sun. As the competition for the reserve seats had just ended, the many budding talents and matured powerhouses that had debuted during the competition were now a target of attention for the secret pavilion. To sort out the information of these people and sell the information in the next publication of the God's Domain's experts list, the whole secret pavilion had become extremely busy. Every secret pavilion member within the Typhoon City residence was either sending out information to other branches or organizing the information they received from other branches. Everyone was so busy that they lost track of time. Uncle Yuan, the strength Zero Wing displayed this time is truly astonishing. One Tier 4 Sword Emperor and one suspected Tier 4 Great Wizard that wields Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Zero Wing has even become a guild officially recognized by the War God's Temple. The various superpowers will have to fear Zero Wing now, Purple Jade exclaimed as she read the report on Zero Wing in her hands. B-B Zero Wing was a guild they had watched grow from nothing to its current state. Initially, Zero Wing had been a small guild that couldn't even be considered third-rate. However, it gradually grew into a large guild that could challenge even first-rate guilds. Afterward, it had fought against superpowers time after time. Now, it even stood on the international stage of God's Domain and aided Frost Heaven in securing the 6th reserve seat, shocking countless powers in God's Domain in one fell swoop. At this point, even the various superpowers had to acknowledge that Zero Wing was a guild to be wary of. The only thing Zero Wing lacked now was a sufficiently strong foundation. It just didn't have the frightening manpower and expansive territory of a superpower. While that's correct, you shouldn't forget that Zero Wing is a guild that is completely reliant on only a handful of individuals to support it. The guild is walking a tightrope, and a single mistake can lead to disaster. Now, it has even become the focus of God's Domain's various powers, Yuan Tiexian said in a low tone, shaking his head. The Tier 4 promotion quest is simply too challenging. You should know this as well. Yet, Zero Wing has 2 people suspected to have completed their promotions. You should know very well what this implies. Uncle Yuan, you mean, Zero Wing has grasped a way to complete the Tier 4 promotion quest easily? Purple Jade was a little shocked. According to the Secret Pavilion's information gathering, the hardest part in completing the Tier 4 promotion quest was searching for one's Tier 4 legacy land. Even the Secret Pavilion had yet to locate a single Tier 4 legacy land. If Zero Wing really found a reliable way to locate Tier 4 legacy lands, this would be an incredibly frightening matter. This is only conjecture. We still don't have any evidence to back it up right now. Moreover, I think the possibility of this being true is low. After all is said and done, God's Domain is a relatively fair game. If Tier 4 legacy lands could be located easily, Tier 4 classes wouldn't be considered powerhouses in God's Domain, Yuan Tiexian said, shaking his head. Even so, just the possibility holds an incredibly fatal attraction for the various powers. According to the inside information we've secured thus far, we can confirm that over a dozen superpowers are already preparing to suppress Zero Wing. In addition, Zero Wing has plenty of enemies: the War-Blood Adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, the Dark World's various powers in the Dark Knight Empire, and Saint's Hand in Starmoon Kingdom. Starlink, Zero Wing's old nemesis, has also been conducting a series of secretive operations recently. Starlink seems to be planning something big by the looks of it. If these superpowers join forces, even if Zero Wing has a Sword Emperor and a Great Wizard defending its territories, the guild will still have difficulty surviving. Purple Jade's complexion turned ugly at Yuan Tiexian's analysis. A pseudo-superpower was actually fighting on 3 different fronts. Moreover, every one of its opponents was either a superpower or an organization backed by a superpower. Anyone that heard this would definitely feel despair. For Zero Wing to survive until now, this was simply a miracle. Of course, Shi Feng and the rest of Zero Wing's upper echelon might not be afraid of the various superpowers as individuals, but it was a different story for a guild with so many members. It would be very easy for the various superpowers to attack such a guild. Meanwhile, if a guild lacked manpower, there were many things it couldn't accomplish. One such example was the collection of resources. Just this point alone would be sufficient to make Shi Feng and the others crumble. What more operating guild towns and cities? This is just the situation on the eastern continent. Zero Wing isn't safe on the western continent either. I heard that many of the western continent's superpowers are showing interest in the Starlight Fortress, Yuan Tiexian said, chuckling when he saw the blank expression on Purple Jade's face. You should know by now that Zero Wing has always been walking a tightrope, right? What happens next will depend on what kind of decision Black Flame makes. If Black Flame handles this properly and avoids disaster with Zero Wing's current foundations, it is definitely possible for the guild to progress further. If it's mishandled, then Zero Wing will be eternally doomed. When Yuan Tiexin stated his last sentence, his voice was filled with confidence. That was because, unlike most people, he knew that mythology was most likely the driving force behind the various superpowers' decision to act against Zero Wing this time. Mythology was a behemoth. It had an unfathomable foundation in both the virtual gaming world and the real world. It was an existence that even the current secret pavilion feared greatly. As Yuan Tiexin and Purple Jade conversed, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside the office door. The next moment, a level 114 Tier 3 ranger barged into the office, which made Yuan Tiexin frown in obvious dissatisfaction with this Tier 3 ranger's panicky actions. "What's the matter? Why are you in such a rush?" Yuan Tiexin questioned in a low tone. "It's bad. Elder Yuan, something big happened," the Tier 3 ranger reported hurriedly as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. "Just a while ago, our branches sent in news that a large number of NPCs have appeared on the streets of the various cities." "So what if NPCs appeared? What's there to be surprised about?" Yuan Tiexin reacted nonchalantly. In God's domain, as a town or city developed, the number of NPC residents would increase. This was a normal occurrence. Moreover, players and NPCs practically lived in two completely different worlds. The interactions between the two sides were few and far between. "But the numbers are far too massive," the Tier 3 ranger insisted anxiously. "How many?" Yuan Tiexin asked, his curiosity piqued. "Too many. I don't know how many appeared either." Gulping, the Tier 3 ranger pointed at the nearby window and said, "I think you should look for yourself, Elder Yuan. This matter has already caused an uproar among the players in the city." Uproar. Yuan Tiexin couldn't help his puzzlement. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, he felt that the ranger before him shouldn't be lying. He immediately stood up and approached the window. When the view outside the French window entered his sight, Yuan Tiexin froze on the spot in stupefaction. "Uncle Yuan?" Purple Jade grew puzzled as well when she saw Yuan Tiexin standing stock still. She then walked toward the window to take a look as well. NPCs thronged the main street outside the residence, talking and laughing in groups. Many were adventurers clad in exquisite equipment. Even the lowest leveled among them was level 120, while the strongest one reached level 194. Moreover, these NPC adventurers were Tier 3 on average, with even the weakest one at Tier 2. Aside from these NPC adventurers, there was also a large number of NPC civilians on the street. Purple Jade even saw NPC children running around, playing with pebbles on the street and even fighting each other with wooden swords. These NPCs accounted for over 80% of the people on the main street. Chapter 2735. Different Gods Domain, Zero Wing's Decision. Why are there so many NPCs? Purple Jade couldn't believe her eyes as she looked at the NPCs chatting merrily on the main street. Their current location was an island nation on the western continent, with an incredibly harsh environment. As a result, the player population here was insignificant, let alone the NPC population. If not for the increased trade between the two main continents, which attracted many powers and merchant players to the Typhoon Empire, the number of people walking on the main street wouldn't have exceeded 100. So what was with this situation? With just a casual glance, she already spotted more than 1,000 NPCs, many of them NPC adventurers. Players were only a small group of unremarkable existences. After pondering for some time, Yuan Tiexin turned around and asked the Tier 3 ranger, "Have you investigated the origins of these NPCs yet?" "We've investigated already. However, we don't know where these NPCs came from. The only thing we know is that these NPCs seem to have appeared directly inside the various NPC cities," the Tier 3 ranger replied, shaking his head. Anxiously, he continued, "The appearance of these NPCs has caused a sharp drop in the number of quests available in the Adventurers Association. The number of quests players can pick up is continuously decreasing. Moreover, what else is there?" Yuan Tiexin asked curiously. According to reports, many players have been killed after coming into conflict with NPCs outside the cities. However, this still isn't the most important part. In an uneasy tone, the ranger continued, "Now many NPCs have also flooded into the various guild towns and cities, and some NPCs with bad behavior have caused a lot of incidents. Most importantly, according to our observations, various NPC forces are actually secretly investigating us, How is this possible? Purple Jade goggled in shock. She never thought that there would come a day where the NPCs who only knew how to give quests would secretly investigate them. He got goosebumps at the thought of this. It was as if the dolls they were playing with had suddenly gained life and began secretly observing their every action. At this time, the secret pavilion wasn't the only one shocked by the sudden influx of NPCs in the game. The various powers and players of God's domain were similarly horrified by this situation. What's going on? Why are so many NPCs competing with us for quests? That's nothing. I feel that these NPCs are looking at us players as if they are looking at aliens. Some bars in the city are actually refusing entry to players. You think that's surprising? Wait till you go out to the fields. Right now, the NPCs out in the fields far outnumber us players. Some of these NPCs are even stealing dungeons from us. For a time, independent players had heated discussions over the sudden changes in God's domain. Everyone felt as if they had truly arrived in a different world. Now, in addition to other players, they also had to compete with NPCs. Moreover, these NPCs were even more difficult to deal with than players. Not only were these NPCs powerful, but they also had an overwhelming advantage in numbers over players. The only advantage players had was their inability to die a permanent death. However, as if understanding this point, the NPCs generally didn't forge irreconcilable feuds with players. Most of them would only teach the players that offended them a lesson. Only the Dark Forces NPCs disregarded this matter. Compared to the independent players, though, the various powers were the ones that had a truly big headache. Damn it. Why did all these NPCs come from? Instead of staying in NPC cities, they actually came to make trouble in our guild towns and cities. Many of our businesses can't even operate normally thanks to them. That's not all. Some NPCs are even robbing our mines and transportation teams. Along with the sudden influx of NPCs, the various powers suddenly found that the difficulty of maintaining the security of guild towns and cities and completing large-scale transportation quests had increased drastically. Some superpowers had even tasted getting bullied for the first time since entering God's domain. However, the current players were simply no match for these NPC forces. Even the superpowers had no choice but to abandon many of their development plans and focus on protecting their territories. As for the major powers, they even began abandoning some of their guild towns to concentrate their forces on defending their crucial territories. For a time, the various player forces in God's domain shrank rapidly. Simultaneously, they also began recruiting members desperately to defend against the NPC forces' assault. Silverwing City, Zero Wing's residents. Due to the sudden increase in the game's NPC population and the many incidents subsequent to this change, Zero Wing's upper echelon had gathered to discuss how to deal with these NPCs. Guild leader, the major powers are frantically recruiting members to consolidate their power. They are also spending a lot of money to hire Tier 3 NPCs from the Adventurers Association to guard their guild towns. If we don't act now, I'm afraid the more powerful Tier 3 NPCs will be snatched up by others, Liang Jing said anxiously to Shi Feng after reading the latest report. The sudden influx of NPCs had caught every player off guard. Originally, the changes to the NPCs after the first major update was already a slight problem. Now that the NPC population far surpassed the player population, this change was no longer just a problem but a disaster. Zero Wing's 3 guild cities held strategic locations and also had incredible growth potential. Meanwhile, according to the information Liang Jing's subordinates sent her, many NPC forces had already set their sights on Zero Wing's guild cities. These NPC forces refrained from taking action only because they were still investigating Zero Wing's strength. However, once they completed their investigation, they would most likely take action immediately. If an NPC force took action, it could create much more trouble than a player force. While the possibility of a frontal confrontation was low, it wasn't exactly impossible. And even if the various NPC forces did not directly assault Zero Wing's guild cities, they could still dispatch NPCs to lurk around the guild cities' trade routes and ambush susceptible targets. That would be a nightmare for Zero Wing. Hence, Zero Wing had to increase its defenses as soon as possible. That's right. Guild leader, if we act slowly, the various major powers will steal all of the powerful Tier 3 NPCs. The other management personnel present nodded in agreement with Liang Jing. In the current situation, Even the various superpowers had to lower their heads and hire NPCs from the Adventurers Association. If Zero Wing didn't act now, it would soon be too late. After all, there was a limited number of Tier 3 NPCs available for hire at the Adventurers Association. If the other powers got to pick first, nothing would be left for Zero Wing. Although Zero Wing also had many powerful Tier 3 personal guards, these personal guards were still far from enough to maintain the security of 3 cities. Moreover, the difficulty of directly recruiting Tier 3 personal guards was incredibly high. At best, players could only recruit Tier 2 NPCs with good growth potential. In addition, personal guards cost a lot of money to nurture. On the off chance these personal guards died in combat, Zero Wing would suffer a major blow. However, the Adventurers Association's NPCs wouldn't pose such a problem. Even if these NPCs died, it was none of Zero Wing's concern. The guild wasn't obligated to pay a huge price to resurrect these NPCs. That won't be necessary. Shi Feng shook his head. While hiring the Adventurers Association's Tier 3 NPCs is indeed a solution, it isn't a long-term one. The cost to hire these NPCs is excessive. Any random Tier 3 NPC will cost at least 100 gold per day to hire, and the defense of a small city will require at least 500 Tier 3 NPCs. That's an expenditure of 50,000 gold per day. Only the superpowers could afford to pay a daily maintenance fee of 50,000 gold for one guild city. However, it was a different story for Zero Wing. Zero Wing originally already spent a lot of coins every day. In fact, the guild was reliant on selling coins for credits to maintain the operation of its headquarters in the real world. Hence, it couldn't afford to hire Tier 3 NPCs to safeguard its guild cities at all. But quite a number of NPCs have begun making a ruckus in our cities. Fortunately, we have Tier 4 NPCs defending our cities, so those NPC forces are still cautious when causing a scene. However, if those NPC forces take action against us outside our cities, we'll have a difficult time managing the situation, Yulan said worriedly. Previously, as their opponents were only players, they could still deal with the situation. However, now that their opponents were Tier 3 NPCs that ranged between level 130 and level 160, Zero Wing was in an incredibly unfavorable situation. Of Zero Wing's combatants, the only ones capable of fighting the hostile NPCs were the guild's personal guards. However, these personal guards were necessary for maintaining order in the guild cities. Let's just stop caring then, Shi Feng said, chuckling. Yulan was stunned by Shi Feng's response. Stop caring? At this moment, let alone Yulan, the other Zero Wing executives present were also stunned. What did Shi Feng mean by that? If they stopped caring about this situation, how would the 3 guild cities generate income? If the guild cities lost their trade routes, the items sold by NPCs would disappear from the cities. If that happened, the cities would lose a significant portion of their attraction for players. Moreover, the taxes collected from NPC merchants made up a large portion of the guild cities' income. From today onward, Zero Wing's 3 guild cities will prohibit entry to unrelated NPCs. As for NPC merchants, we'll set an exception for them. However, each shop is allowed to bring only 10 people into the cities, Shi Feng said calmly. In addition, raise the entrance fees in all 3 cities to 20 silver coins and double the rent for the shops. However, partnered powers may receive a 20% discount. Guild leader. Everyone present in the meeting room gaped in shock at Shi Feng's words. They could indeed prevent NPCs from making a ruckus in the 3 guild cities by prohibiting entry to the majority of NPCs. However, the development of the 3 cities would also stagnate. After all, players had to get their quests from these NPCs. Moreover, many of the items sold in the 3 cities were actually sold by NPCs. If they refused entry to NPCs, it would be equivalent to having the income of the 3 cities. As for raising entrance fees to 20 silver and doubling shop rent, that was basically saying Zero Wing wanted no players inside its guild cities. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Zero Wing would be digging its own grave if it instituted these measures. Just get it done. I have my reasons, Shi Feng said, not bothering to provide any additional explanations. He then left the meeting room immediately. When the first major update took place in his previous life, the various powers already had plenty of Tier 3 players under their command, with some even having Tier 4 players. However, at present not only was the NPC population boom much bigger than in the past, but the various powers also barely had any Tier 3 experts under their command. Hence, the damage the various powers would suffer in the ensuing chaos would definitely be much worse than in the past. While Zero Wing indeed possessed great strength and even commanded Tier 4 NPCs, it was still impossible to maintain the 3 guild cities' security with their current manpower. The only solution Zero Wing had now was to take decisive action and thoroughly prohibit NPCs from entering its guild cities. Afterward, he would have Zero Wing's members enter the secret Covenant Tower in full force to raise their levels and strength. Otherwise, once the NPC population increased even further and the NPC forces began their assault, Zero Wing would be in a ton of trouble. Soon afterward, Zero Wing's 3 guild cities announced Shi Feng's decision to the outside world. All 3 cities immediately went into an uproar.